Chair Buckner?
Here.
And we have a quorum.
Thank you. Next item is number 4, approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion? So moved.
Sorry.
The agenda is approved unanimously.
Okay, the minutes then of September 7th are approved. The next item is public comment. This is general public comment time.
Oh, the minutes.
Excuse me, I checked it off too soon.
And actually, staff has one correction.
Okay, thank you.
On the last page, actually, page 6 of 7, under Commissioner Hoopengunner's comments, she had concerns, and she also directed staff for building and safety sign-offs on all plans before they are brought before the commission, so the record will reflect that.
Okay, thank you. I apologize for that. So based on that correction, do we have approval? A motion? So moved.
Second.
And the minutes are approved unanimously, as amended.
And the next item is public comment. At this time, it's general comments from the public, not on necessarily on items that are before the commission tonight, just general things. Do we have any?
We have no general public comments tonight.
Those of you who are in the audience who would like to speak, there will be an opportunity at the end of our meeting to take a public comment slip, and I urge you to do that. Check with our Secretary, David Gillick. Next item is number 7. It's Director's Report. Hi, John. Come forward, please.
Good evening, Chair and members of the Commission. I'm John Kehoe, Assistant Director for the Department. So tonight we're going to take a little bit different thing on the Director's Report. We're trying to squeeze in training where we can. We know that we have several new commissioners and also refresher for long-term commissioners. So we have a lot of projects ahead of us, so we're going to squeeze in training wherever we can in our agenda. So we're going to spend maybe 10 to 15 minutes tonight talking about the development review process from the moment an applicant comes from the first time they come to the planning counter all the way through the planning review process, the building review process, construction process to signing off on the C of O. And so we've got David DeGrazia from Current Planning and Cynthia Zabala from our building division. They're going to be leading the presentation tonight.
Thank you, John. I'm David DeGrazia, the manager for the Current and Historic Preservation Planning Division. Tonight, as John said, we're going to go over 2 pieces of our entitlement process. I'm going to go over the planning permit process, and then Cynthia Zabala, the acting building director, will take you through the building permit process. So we have a presentation. So for current planning, the process begins with an application. Normally, we will meet with applicants before they submit. At those meetings, we will go over all of the different zoning requirements that we have, and oftentimes we'll also even go over some of the building requirements as well, depending on how the person wants to communicate with us on it. After that, we accept the application, and as part of that, design plans are submitted, which are the plans that eventually make their way to the Planning Commission for review and approval. If Gwen Pugh is here tonight, he is one of the city's contract urban designers. He is going to talk about what is included in design plans and what's involved in preparing those.
Hello. Hi, it's a pleasure to be here. I've been working with and in the city for the last 6 months and have much appreciated working with staff and with the community, development community. So I think one of the things that, that is very confusing is to many people is the idea of what the process is, and in part it has to do with the discretionary part of the process, the entitlement part of the process, and the by right part of the process, which is essentially the building permit. So one of the things that's really important, I think, to the entitlement part, which is your responsibility, is really, are these projects complying with the community standards? Are they complying with what it is that the community wants? Now, a lot of these elements are codified. But in addition to that, it is something that the Planning Commission has the responsibility of really looking to make sure that, especially larger projects and other projects where you have a choice and you can insert your comments and opinions and review and perform an incredibly important function for the community at large. It is a big responsibility. I know. I was on the Planning Commission in Santa Monica for 7 years, and I didn't realize how significant it was until, in fact, I had left. And I felt such relief, to be honest with you, because it was such a big responsibility that one takes in shaping your community. But from the perspective of the developer, the issue here is they don't quite know how you're going to respond. So it's really important that they come to you with a project that gives you the idea of the scope, how it's going to be used, the setbacks, the aesthetics, the way it responds to the community, its urban design values, its massing, all of those kinds of things. And it's an expensive process, and I think that I've been in many communities, and the communities that seem to work most effectively go through an iterative process. In other words, you come in with some early ideas about what you want. You work with staff to make sure that it has the compliance with the planning and zoning and development standards of the community. And then there becomes a formal proposal. Now that's usually what's called the schematic design phase. So the quality of the architect and the developer is really important here, because like so many projects, there are many things going on all at once, and a lot of them are code related. In other words, are you getting the exiting in properly? Are the stairs where they need to be? But it's also one where there's likely to be change in the process. So it's important that they understand that and understand the codes, but it's important that they be flexible about responding to what it is that the community is looking to have happen. So it's important that that the architects and the developers do their due diligence. They are professionals. That is their responsibility. It's, as I say, an iterative process. As you try something out and find something else doesn't work, or you need to change something, that process happens through this. It's not the most, you want to have people sort of, for want of a better word, not dig in their heels. So to do that, if these comments come early in the process, it's much easier to shape the process of what you're going to get in terms of the final product. So there's likely to be change. So you're not going to get something that's fully baked, but you do need to get something that you know is going to be buildable. There are often minor adjustments that need to occur as you get into the details of exactly how something happens. But you don't exactly know how everything's going to work until you get down to the technical aspects of it. So it's really important that you get enough information to really understand what the building's going to be, but still allow it to be a creative and open process. And so that's really the part of the process that you're involved in, and that's so important.
Thank you, Gwen. So after the project comes in and those the plans are submitted, the city's first review is part of a development review committee. It's composed of many different divisions, including building and safety, code compliance, finance, housing, the mobility division, engineering, environmental services, arts, urban design, parking, and last but not least, landscaping. So we do hold a meeting at City Hall. All of these different areas are represented by an individual. The project is presented, and then typically we will go around and each of those people will give comments, ask questions, kind of go over the project. And then as part of that, they will give official kind of notes through an email to the planner. And that is all incorporated so that we communicate that out to the applicant. All of that happens within the first 30 days. So after the planner gathers all those comments from the meetings, they're put into a letter, And oftentimes the applicant then will come in and meet with staff to kind of go over what those comments are and make sure that they understand them. Cynthia is going to talk a little bit specifically about the building and safety part of DRC and the items that they look for and comment on.
Thanks, David. So for building and safety, this often includes a review of the design drawings for big picture items that could potentially be problematic or cause major design changes. And some of these items, I mean, there's several depending on the project, but some of these items include maximum height and area limitations as required by the code, maximum area of exterior wall openings that are permitted based on proximity to the property line, the number of required exits shown on plans for egress purposes, whether exterior stairwells or egress balconies meet the minimum distance to the property line, and whether or not the key accessibility features are shown on the plan, such as parking or path of travel, because this could impact the spatial plan. So because these drawings are in sort of a development stage, a design development stage, and typically don't include a whole lot of detailing, we're looking to see whether or not the plans in general comply with the code. So the review of the details and related elements, the real crux of it occurs when we receive the construction documents, which we'll talk about later in the building permit process.
Thank you. So I just want to go over quickly what happens after DRC in general. So we do require that a neighborhood meeting be held within 60 days of the application submittal. The reason we have that 60-day number is that we want to make sure that neighbors are aware of the project and that they can comment early, and that the applicant can hopefully incorporate some of the neighborhood comments and concerns in designing their project. The application is eventually deemed complete once we've received all of the items that are asked for on the application. Usually after that, the project is reviewed by the Design Review Subcommittee, which is 3 members of the Planning Commission that serve in an advisory function back to the full Planning Commission. Normally it just goes once, but there are times where the subcommittee will request that design changes be made and that it be brought back to the subcommittee before it moves on to Planning Commission. We will determine what the CEQA document is and complete that. After that, we'll start on the staff report and the resolution is drafted. That is where we'll incorporate many of the conditions of approval that you see in your resolutions, most of which come from other divisions. After that, we oftentimes, for different departments, will send that resolution off to them to make them do a quick review, make sure that all of the conditions that they requested are there and that they're correct, just to get another set of eyes on it. And then we do our required public noticing, which, depending on the meeting, is typically about 28 days before Planning Commission. And then if all goes well, we have the Planning Commission hearing and the project is approved, which then turns it back over to Cynthia's group.
So I'm going to get into the building permit process, but before I do that, I'm going to introduce our consultants from M6 Consultants, Masood Mahmood and Bob Woodward. They review some of the plans for the city and are our consultants. They also work with other jurisdictions, and they're here to provide, if we have questions at the end of the session, they'll be able to answer some of those questions. So as we dive into the building permit process, first, the construction documents need to be finalized and completed. This could take a significant amount of time to develop from that whole planning permit process. And so I'm going to turn it over to Gwen to kind of explain what exactly is in a finalized construction set of documents that we would see when people apply for the building permit.
So as opposed to the planning process and the discretionary review that the Planning Commission frequently has for projects, unless they're minor projects, which may be a by right project, the permitting process for the construction documents is essentially a by right. In other words, people are entitled to be able to build it after they've received planning approval, provided they comply with all of the building codes and community codes that are part of the process. These are very technical plans. And they serve a very different purpose than the design plans do. The design is to give an intent and to understand how something be used. These documents are developed so that somebody can actually build by them. And it involves the coordination of many different groups and of engineers and other consultants. So typically you're at the very least going to have a structural engineer, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, but there may be many more. There may be an acoustical engineer, a lighting designer, the landscape, the civil engineer, the soils report, and it can go on from there. So it depends on the complexity. So it's really important that the project knows that it can be built. In other words, that it is compliant and has received the approval in terms of the design concepts and of the community development standards, so that when you get into it, that this whole process, which involves a lot of coordination and can be very exhaustive, proceeds smoothly.
So, upon completion of the construction documents, plans are submitted to Building and Safety for concurrent plan check review. And right there you see that we have both internal review and external agency review. Let me see. Here's the graphic that shows all the divisions and departments within City Hall who look at the plans. It's very similar to what you saw in the planning approval process. It includes building and safety, code compliance, finance, housing, transportation and mobility, rent stabilization, engineering, environmental, arts, planning, economic development, and landscaping. So the intent of the concurrent plan check process is to streamline the plan review and make sure that all departments and divisions are looking at the same completed set of plans at the same time. And for building and safety, this is the point at which we perform a detailed review of the building code elements and issue comments or any clarifications any code-related issues. So David can explain to you a little bit more of what happens on the planning side at this stage.
Yeah, so in this part of the concurrent plan check, the planner's main responsibility is to review the building set of plans to make sure that those are in compliance as what you all have approved at Planning Commission. So we're looking at everything over and over again. There are usually multiple iterations of plans that come in, and our principal duty is, again, to make sure that whatever is going through building is going to match up with what was approved here. You know, oftentimes because you're looking at design plans, there are things that change. We have some things that are very minor. We can just do that at a staff level, and that's what happens most often. And we expect that that's going to happen because we know that as they develop the construction documents, there's going to be some of those changes. However, there are sometimes major changes as they get into that process, and that is when we would bring that back to the commission for a full review. Once we don't feel comfortable doing that at the staff level, and it falls into that other category.
Okay. So in addition to this, we also verify that outside agency approvals have also been obtained. These external agencies include the Health Department, the Fire Department, County Sanitation, and Waste Management. I think we lost the graphic, but I'll continue.
Okay, thank you.
So the concurrent plan check process typically goes through a few rounds of reviews and comments until all divisions have received the required information and have approved it. At this point, the plans will then be deemed approved, and upon approval of the plans, building permits are issued, which gives authorization to begin the construction process. The construction process then begins, and inspections are done by city inspectors to verify that what is on the plans is actually what is being built. There we go. Out in the field. So once construction is completed, a review request is sent out to the same departments and divisions in the concurrent plan review process. This gives the divisions the opportunity to make sure that all of their conditions and requirements have been met and addressed. And so once all of the divisions have signed off, the building official will issue a certificate of occupancy for the building, which indicates that the building is complete, safe, and ready to be occupied. So I think that pretty much concludes the presentation, and we're going to be open for some questions and answers at this time.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from any of the commissioners regarding the process? No comments or questions? Okay, David.
You know, I had the opportunity to go through this whole process recently, and I got to do it here, and I got to do it in the city of LA, and I have to say that, you know, our staff does a wonderful job on the planning side here, and I've got to see that for the last 6 years. But both planning and building and safety, you guys do a wonderful job at what you do, and we're very fortunate to have the best of the best. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions?
I just have one question about Design Review Committee. If the findings of the committee are significant and require significant redesign, is there a recycle of the process, or how does that how do those issues get addressed?
So the subcommittee is advisory, so they don't officially approve or deny any projects. But normally they will actually direct staff to bring the project back to them if they're not comfortable with what has come forward. So most of the time everything will go through maybe in one visit to that subcommittee, but there are times where we've been back numerous times to get that resolved. But it really is up to the subcommittee members on how they feel about it, and they sort of say when they're ready to let it move on to the full commission.
So, for example, 2 weeks ago, the project we had didn't meet building and safety requirements. So what process, where in this process would those plans be assured to meet the building and safety process before being brought before planning?
So, like Cynthia said, the initial review is the Development Review Committee, which is that internal staff group. So they will do the best job they can do with those development plans to get through and give those really thorough comments. Oftentimes, when we feel like there's been a major change to something, or if we think their comments were very extensive, we will route it back through that entire Development Review Committee. But other times, we will end up at commission, and as happened a couple of weeks ago, something will come up that building didn't have enough detail at the time they got to look at it to address that. So the next point that gets caught is when they come in for building and safety. And at that point, staff has to determine, is this a major enough change where it no longer complies with what the commission approved? Or is it something minor that we're comfortable that we can handle at that level, still meets the intent of what the commission wanted, or does it need to come back if it doesn't? So there are kind of 3 check periods in all of this. We do our Development Review Committee, so that's the first, everybody looks at it and comments. The second one is when it comes into concurrent plan check, everybody looks at it again and comments. And then the third one, as Cynthia was saying, is when we get to the final C of O process so they can occupy it, all of those departments go ahead again and look at everything, oftentimes go out and inspect the building in person before they sign off. So really we have sort of, I guess, a fail-safe system to make sure that we're all continually checking it, and sometimes it will go multiple rounds through those committees.
So sometimes it takes not so much time, and other times it could take several years to get through the whole process. Is that correct?
That's correct, and it really, a lot of it depends sort of on the quality of the architect and the design and what we get. So some of the plans, when they come in very complete and they're well done, can move through very quickly. Other times when things don't go quite so well, or they're not constructed the way they should have been, it can take a long time. It really is sort of on a project-by-project basis and very specific to the individual applying.
And also the size of the project, how many?
That too, and the complexity.
Complexity of design and all the plans that have to be drawn up. Are there any other questions? I thank you very much. I think it's very helpful, not only for our commission, but also perhaps for the public to have an idea of just exactly what happens, and for them to maybe understand that when a matter comes to design review subcommittee, it's pretty much in the early stages, And it's part of a process of working together with the developer and the architect and to help them come up with the best project they can before they actually bring it to the Planning Commission. And however, when it comes to Planning Commission, this isn't the final set of plans at all. There's going to be a lot of people taking a good look at it before it ever gets to the point where it's approved and ready for project to even demolish and begin construction. They don't get their demolition permit until they've got all their plans in order. Is that correct? So. That's correct. Okay. So thank you so much. I do appreciate that. Are there any items from commissioners at this point? Okay.
Hi, everybody.
Stacey.
Happy Thursday evening. I know that originally on tonight's agenda, well, on the last meeting schedule that we received, R3C-C was set to come before us, and I just wanted to get an update on that and find out more about the live work update.
Can you address that, David? Or John Kehoe, maybe?
Yeah, I was going to say I'm going to defer to John on that question.
If you're not ready now, you might come back later in the meeting.
Was the question, when is the R3C coming back?
Just when is it coming to us? Because I
So
know it was
think we
originally on
have,
tonight's meeting. And
It's on the look-ahead scheduled. I think it's the next.
It's been legally noticed for October 19th.
It's the next meeting.
Okay, great, thank you.
And
Thank
I
you.
have one question.
Sure. Ms.
Will that include the final live work study?
It will include, a portion of the item will include the talking about the live work study, yes. It's the final for what we're bringing forward, yes.
Anybody else? Any other commissioners? Okay, without any other comments from commissioners, we'll move on to the consent calendar, which there are none. And then we move on to item 10, which is our public hearings. First item before us is 1141 North Detroit. Again, we're going to have a staff report first, and then we'll have questions of staff from our Planning Commission members, if there are some, and then we'll have the public hearing and move forward. Thank you. Jennifer Alki.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair, members of the Commission. My name is Jennifer Alki. I'm a senior planner here with the City of West Hollywood. The project before you tonight is for the redevelopment of a site on the west side of Detroit Street between Santa Monica and Lexington Avenue. Detroit Street is 1 block west of La Brea, and so consequently this block of Detroit has a mix of residential uses, mixed-use buildings that front Santa Monica, which are the Domain and the Dillon, and parking lot associated with the McDonald's on La Brea. The residential development is largely multifamily and varied with respect to the period of construction. The architectural styles and scale are also varied in the area. There is currently a 4-story condominium building under construction on the west side of, on the east side of Detroit across from this project. The proposed project, it consists of demolition of 2 structures housing 3 residential units. The site would be developed with 5 condominium units in a 3-story building over 1 level of subterranean parking. The project site is located in the R3 zoning district, which allows for 5 units on this site and for a building of up to 4 stories in height. The applicant has requested only 3 stories for this project, and the proposed building is 10 feet lower in height than is allowed by code. The parking area has been designed to be fully subterranean with 12 parking spaces, and this represents 2 guest parking spaces, which is 1 more than would be required by code. They're only required 1 guest parking space. The project provides code-required private and common open space areas and complies with the multifamily development standards set forth in the municipal code. The project's design idea incorporates a larger form which is clad in limestone tile that is then carved away to reveal a warmer wood-clad surface beneath. This breaks down the massing of the building overall while providing additional warmth and visual interest to the facade. The design review subcommittee was generally supportive of the design with some discussion and a critique involving the front windows and some involving the screening materials. And in response, the applicant changed the screening materials to be a horizontal wood slat to be simpler and cleaner than the original lattice work that was proposed originally. Here we can see the north and south elevations of the proposed building. The project is broken up essentially into two buildings going east and west. One is toward the front of the parcel and one is towards the rear. And this also provides visual relief on the sides of the building. And it also has the same pattern of carving away into that wood-clad material. The design is made possible by the townhome-style configuration of the units. There was a question raised regarding the conditions pertaining to construction worker parking. So there was some conversation about that. I've included the standard condition requiring that construction parking be subject to encroachment permit on the street for specific periods of time, and prohibiting the use of any resident or guest parking permits for the construction-related parking. There was a suggestion to further restrict that so that the encroachment permit parking areas are only used for construction-related activities, and requiring construction workers to actually park off-site somewhere else that's designated by the developer and secured by the contractor off-site. So they would lease parking somewhere else and have their workers park there and then shuttle in or walk in if it's close enough. So that's a discussion point that we can address moving forward if you would like to consider or reconsider condition 10.6 regarding the construction worker parking. But generally, staff is supportive of the project, and it will integrate into the eclectic neighborhood well, and it will provide additional housing units. It's thoughtfully designed with quality materials, and there's ample parking provided in side-by-side configurations. So staff recommends approval of the development permit, demolition permit, and tract map. I'm here if you have any questions for staff.
Any questions for commissioners or staff at this point?
Just one.
Yes, open here.
Again, I'd like some clarity around this aging in place, how this is friendly for aging in place, given that there's the laundry's on the second floor, all the closet space is on the second and third floor. There's no bathtub for someone who needs a tub for aging in place on the first floor.
Lynn, perhaps you want to wait and talk to the applicant and ask about these issues.
Oh, well, it was staff's assertion in the report
that it
was friendly to aging in place.
Right, I understand.
So that was my question to staff as to how it was aging.
Okay.
Friendly to aging in place.
If they can answer it, then
sure,
they will.
I'm happy to. So while it's not perfect, I think that you would want to see in a development that is considered to be really a stellar aging in place development would be single story, would have everything accessible on the same level. That's not the type that is given here. So considering the type of development that this is with the 3-story townhome style units, it's difficult to get to that level of the aging in place compatibility. However, what we have gotten from them, or what they have proposed to include in this project, is an adaptable bathroom that could be converted potentially to being more accessible. Everything on that ground level is accessible. It's something that we can ask them to consider in terms of relocating the laundry, if that's possible. That's a good point. But we have the kitchen, bathroom facility that could be a full bathroom, and potentially a living, sleeping area on that first floor, so that it at least has those amenities for somebody.
Okay. Any other questions of staff at this point? So then we'll begin the public portion of this item. We'll ask the developer's representative, I believe, is going to come forward, and you'll have 5 minutes at this point. Then we'll have items from the public in response, and then you have an opportunity to rebut if you should want to do so at the end.
Chair, it would be 10 minutes for the applicant.
10 minutes. Did I say 5? I'm sorry. Thank you for the correction.
Now I can talk twice as slow. For the record, my name is Margaret Taylor of Apex LA, representing the applicant in this case. We do want to thank staff for all of their work with us throughout the processing of the application. It's nice to be able to see a kind of a walkthrough of the application process that we do engage in, and the involvement of all of the critical specialty people early in the process, as well as the community feedback that we get, so that by the time we do get to this point, we actually do know that it'll work for stormwater management and for fire life safety and things like that. And in this case, it did play out in the development of the project. I'll go through some of the features that I think staff did an excellent job of walking you through the project, and we did coordinate with them on the exhibits that are in front of you, and of course we have the 3D model available if anyone wants to see it, as well as the materials board. The unique features about this individual project are that we did do the courtyard design. So what that did allow was for the fire exit from the garage to come up through the middle of the property. One of the things mentioned in the staff report is that does help activate that courtyard area, but also in terms of disabled accessibility, it does bring somebody up towards the middle of the property, not having to go such longer distances one direction or another. And we do have additional guest parking space, and so we actually have 2 disabled accessible parking spaces in the garage, which I think is a nice kind of unique feature of the property, and all the parking is side by side. In terms of what staff is referring to, we do have what we're calling a wet room on the first floor. We have put a lot of thought, considering competing factors of design, trying to maximize the accessibility and longevity of that first floor unit, wanting to make sure, among other things, that we do have that living and dining area, we do have the wet room area, and we could work in a washroom dryer situation if that was what somebody needed to do there. It would just obviously be a smaller square footage to be confined to. In terms of some of the comments on the report that we agree with, that there was, this is a very appropriate location for the type and style of construction. We're happy to put the investment into the materials. We do have the significant amount of the building utilizing the limestone design, and we appreciate the call out on how it works with the wood, and that it kind of creates a feeling of more natural materials that I think the community can appreciate. We did also incorporate, there are good comments in the staff report about the landscape design. There is an area for seating out in that front courtyard area, and I think that we're very interested in putting some type of permanent furniture that would be out there and make it usable, but it definitely is a front yard enjoyment space that could really be a functioning space. And I think a comment made in the staff report is that the courtyard areas, the front yard, and the roof areas all create interaction of inside and outside on this property that really have created a good living space, and I think adds to the interaction with the neighborhood. In terms of the height, I know that sometimes we are concerned about making sure that the height is meeting its code requirements so that we don't have a future situation where another development is jeopardized because of being higher than us. In this situation, we really do try to take into consideration the surrounding development, and in this situation, we didn't need all of the 10 extra feet that was available to us, and it made more sense in the relationship to the community to have the lower height, so that's how the project was designed. In terms of the community outreach, it was done early in the process. We were grateful that it is done early in the process. We got positive feedback on the design. We got positive feedback on the parking, and we are protecting in place the 2 street trees, which was something that the community asked us to try to preserve, and so we did work really hard as we continued through the process to keep that. And then another comment as we went through the design review committee was that desire to have the no stairs in the front yard, and we ended up moving it into the courtyard area, and I think that was also an improvement. So I guess to conclude our comments, and I don't think I went to 10 minutes, but is just that we're very grateful to be here. We take great sense of responsibility in terms of these projects. I think that we can talk more in terms of the construction parking condition. I think we've been thinking of it very seriously. We're happy to work with the various departments in terms of what requirements work best. We are keeping in mind that we want to be 100% able to comply and compliant, and also make it very clear for people in the neighborhood to know what the rules are, make it very clear for our construction workers to know what the rules are, and have it be feasible enough, because what we can't do, even if we want to appease people, is to have it a situation where we're constantly getting citations and then we look like we're horrible developers and we're not listening to the community. I think it's the wording of the condition. I'm not sure if it makes sense to do it in this forum on this particular application or as part of a broader ad hoc committee, which we're happy to participate in, on how to design language on a regular basis that could work across the board and either be applied on a project-by-project basis or it be a city standard. But I think that we are happy to participate in that, however it works. We think it's a legitimate question, how to make sure that the community understands who can park where and when. We're very happy to, we're looking at already the best ways to shuttle people in from various sites. You know, how far away do they have to go? Would function in terms, so if, for example, we have to lease parking outside the city, we run into an issue of, what if somebody's just coming to drop something off? Or what if somebody's coming to work for 1 hour? Would there be an accounting for that or a plan for it? So it's, I don't think there's an infinite number of issues. I think there's a finite number of issues. I think it's something that should be addressed in terms of respect for the community, and we're happy to participate in that.
Thank you. You still have some more time if you want to take
anything I missed?
Are there any
We
questions?
do have the architectural team here and the applicant here, who's also overseeing a lot of our construction. So we do that for 2 reasons. One is to answer your questions and also to make sure we can follow through on anything that's mentioned or addressed and try to carry it through on any future work that's done on the site. But I don't have anything further.
Okay. Are there any questions, commissioners, of the applicant at this point, or of any of the applicant's team that might be here? Ms. Jones?
I have a question. So I wanted to know, and this wasn't clear to me based on the plans, but what % of the exterior is limestone?
We estimate over 80% of the exterior is limestone.
And the remaining 20 is the wood slats?
It's the, if you look at the, I don't know if you want to bring up the elevations, and the architect could come up and just advise me to be sure that I answer this correctly, but there are lower portions of the elevations, they're cutouts as mentioned in the staff report, so where there's cutaways, we do transfer to the visibility to the wood, or of course there's glass. And then there's also, as you can see on the materials board, a gray stone, but that's used more closer to the garage areas or other parts of the facade. So you can see for the contrasting colors on that north elevation that there's some portions. The other thing I forgot to mention, I think this was something that came up in the design review committee, was the front patio has the accordion folding doors. And that was something and it's the living dining room area, so it's really designed to be a functional space. But that occurs also on the rear of the property and into the courtyard areas. So the gray is more for accentuation and kind of the base lower colors, but limestone's predominantly the feature.
Thank you.
In the drawing, it looks like it's just flat. Limestone's not flat, right? It's got a lot of texture to it.
I can give you the material board if you want to look at that.
Okay, good. Yeah. I'll go take another look at it.
I'll walk it.
It's okay. We can take a look. If everybody wants to see it, we could take a quick break and go down.
But you're right. It does have some feeling and texture to it.
Thank you. Any questions? Anybody else?
I had one question.
Sure.
On those front units with the front opening doors. I'm looking at page 1.2, and that window 2, if those front doors aren't open, because to me, I would imagine if that were my place, I would never open them because that's a security thing, but that's me. Does that window 2 have functional windows? It's hard to tell from the drawings and the elevations. Because without, if they can't open that front window, do they have any windows that open on that floor?
I will ask the architect to confirm. He's going to look at that while he's responding. But the other thing I can tell you is a pretty common comment that we do get from the urban designers and planning staff is a real desire to see all of the windows be functioning windows.
Mm-hmm.
If we look at page A1.6 on the window schedule, window 2, which is the second from the left-hand side, the second in, there is the top left corner of those windows can open. So that's the current proposed. You could recommend more opening. I would probably be that security risk because I love the fresh air so much, but I understand what you're saying.
Are you satisfied, Lynn, with what they've come? Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, with that, then we're going to open it to the members of the community who may want to address this. Do we have any speakers on this?
We don't have any speakers that I know of. I have one speaker slip by an Andrea. I have no idea which item you want to speak on. Other than that, there are none for this item.
Is there an Andrea in the audience that wanted to speak on this item? For B. Thank you for the clarification. Okay, with that in mind, I don't know if you want to come forward to address anything, but we can, since there's no members of the public, then we'll just open it up at this time for...
Chair, I would just like to disclose that I visited the site.
Okay, sorry, thank you. Are there any other disclosures? No?
I met with the developer to discuss unrelated issues regarding landscaping.
Okay, thank you. So with that, thank you for your disclosures, and we'll open it up for commissioners to discuss the item. Are there any who wants to go first? Lynn, you want to go first? No? No? Okay. Rogerio, thank you.
So, Margaret, thank you for your presentations. They're always very thoughtful and thorough. And since I've been on the Planning Commission, I think this is one of TCS's nicest proposals thus far. I really like the corner glass windows. The placements are really beautiful. The walnut wood screens look well detailed. I like how the wood cladding juxtaposes the limestone tile. And I like how well defined and usable the roof decks are. The one question that I had and was curious about is, was any consideration or conversation given to the idea or the possibility that the front of the building, the east elevation, that lower section with a single pane door and then the folding doors on adjacent to it, kind of make the front look, that door looks like the front door. And the front doors are very much in the courtyard. So they're sort of, you know, it's a little confusing to me when I look at the project and understanding how I get to the front door of the unit. Did you have a conversation about that? And
yeah, and if you don't mind bringing up that front elevation as part of the PowerPoint. So yeah, there was some conversation about that, and I could invite the architect up to talk more. One of the priorities given to us was that activation of the patio area and trying to minimize paths, and so we prioritized the use of the front yard as a functioning landscape space with the gravel courtyard versus paths of travel up and into and cutting into that front yard area. Yep. So I think that was part of the conversation. I don't think it would take too much to add a detail to it to make it look more front doorsy.
Well, it's sort of about making it look less front door.
Less front doorsy.
So what I was thinking, if you would consider this, the back units have that planter that divides their little outdoor spaces. Would you consider doing a planter between the single pane door and the folding door, which belong to two separate units, so that you have a sense of separation for those spaces, and then maybe make a gate that sort of divides off that front area so people understand that when they're coming down the path that they need to go past it to the courtyard, and that might help clarify a little bit.
I'll look to my team and see if they're comfortable with it.
Just to consider, yeah.
Yeah. We do have to keep into consideration the fire department access and the 5-foot path of travel. So I think the actual gate might not be an element that's allowed. But if you're talking about in the interior courtyard area, adding some sort of planter to differentiate between the two entrances, I think that that's not an issue for us.
Okay.
Yeah.
Also, in
We're
your
happy, if a condition was worded such that we can work with staff, so that if there's a code conflict, it can be resolved.
Okay, great. The other thing too, I saw walnut called out, and I see on your material board that's Ipe or Manchurian, isn't it? For your wood species. That doesn't look like walnut from here, but okay, because walnut is normally a darker, richer wood, and that Ipe turns gray over time and loses its color. So I was just wondering, what is the spec for the wood?
It is definitely walnut.
Okay.
So they provided that to make sure, give an approximation of the color and the texture, but it will definitely be a walnut material.
Okay, and is the limestone tile actually limestone, or is it a tile? Okay, yeah. Great, those are my only comments.
Thank you for your comments. Very helpful.
Thank you.
Adam?
Yeah, I generally support this project. I like it. I like that on some of your previous projects before I was on the commission, I've often raised the issue of making these pedestrian friendly and not having walls up against the sidewalk, and I appreciate that is the case here. I am the one who brought it up with staff, the condition about construction parking, and I saw a condition on the Corey Avenue project, which was one of the first ones we considered after I joined the commission, that specifically said construction workers shall not park on city streets. And as I visited this site, I noticed that there are several other projects going on. We have more coming up in the future on Detroit. And what can happen, I believe, when we have a concentration of these projects, is all of them take this encroachment, which can be taken at a month at a time, all daylight hours during the work week, and you have all of these constructions all in one area taking up this street parking, and all of a sudden residents have to all run out of their house at 8 a.m. and move their cars to make room for construction workers to park. And I'm wondering, and maybe staff can enlighten me on this, why we would include that sort of condition on Corey Avenue but not on Detroit, or 2 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago on Orange Grove. Is there a difference on why we would include it one place and not another?
I'm not familiar with the situation surrounding the Corey project, if that was something that was negotiated ahead of time or something that came up at the time, but there are standard conditions that we apply so that we can evenly distribute the burden across the board and equally treat each of the projects. So, in certain cases where there are special situations, we can add conditions, but I included the standard ones.
Okay. I would be more comfortable if we included a condition that wasn't as broad as allowing them just to get an encroachment permit for a month at a time for construction worker parking.
I think encroachment permits are by code, right? For a month they're entitled to.
I think that
they pay for it for a month.
Right. The encroachment permits would still be required for construction activities. I think there are deliveries, like Margaret was saying, there are deliveries. There are certain situations where there are equipment that needs to be there but can't be on site for whatever reason, that the encroachment permits, we couldn't prohibit them from getting the encroachment permits and still allow them to effectively construct the project. However, I think that limiting or requiring them to find some other means of parking for construction workers could potentially be in addition to allowing them to have the encroachment permits. And we have a surprise guest visitor here. Dan Mick would like to weigh in on this. He's here from our Code Compliance Division.
I would like to clarify that I'm not suggesting we prohibit encroachment permits, because I recognize turning radius equipment, drop-offs, deliveries, things like that would require it. It's the encroachment permit for construction worker parking only.
For the workers themselves, not just the cement trucks or the construction trucks delivering lumber, and et cetera, like that. Here we have somebody that might have an answer for us.
Yes, my name is Daniel Mick. I'm the Code Compliance Supervisor. Part of my duties is to deal with all of the impacts from construction projects throughout the city. as a standard condition on all construction mitigation plans, because I'm one of the ones that reviews it, there is that language that you're talking about, no, or workers shall not park on any city street in the city. The encroachment permits are not for worker parking, ever. I will not allow it. It would be a direct violation of the mitigation plan, and we enforce that vigorously. The way it's worded on the encroachment permit is really meant to reflect for the general contractor, because he comes and goes constantly throughout the day, deliveries, things like that. If we see actual day-to-day workers or laborers parking there, that's actually a violation of the mitigation plan. And we
they'll
will
be
enforce
ticketed?
that. I'm sorry?
And they'll be ticketed if
Oh, absolutely. It gets very expensive.
So the language, are you not satisfied with the way the language in
I'm
this?
not satisfied with the language that's
Would
in
you
there
like
now.
to take a chance to?
I copied in my own handwriting here the condition we used on the Corey Avenue project, which is construction workers shall not park on any street within West Hollywood and shall utilize off-street parking secured by the contractor until the on-site parking is completed and is able to be used. That's what we approved and staff recommended on a previous project, so that's where I got that language. And let me just say, this has really come to light. There's a project by these same folks across the street from my house, and they took up the parking along the entire frontage of their property, which is a block, the entire block of Romaine between Ogden and Genesee, the frontage of their property on Genesee, the frontage of the property next door to it on Genesee, the frontage of the property on Ogden, plus the frontage of the property next door to it on Ogden, and the signs themselves said contractor parking. So even though that might not be allowed, the sign specifically for an entire month said that. Now, to their credit, I talked to them, they worked it out, they're not using that anymore, but because there are several other projects going on now and there will be coming in the future, I just would hate to overburden the residents of that neighborhood to all have to move their cars to make room for construction workers to come park.
Okay, so
I might be alone on that, but that's where I'm at.
Well, let's see how the other commissioners feel about that before we add it or make it a change as part of their resolution, okay?
Absolutely.
John?
I think if Adam would care to suggest to the staff that they consider making this a standard condition for all residential construction projects, that we give it time for the staff to consider it and come back with a report.
But not to include it as part of this resolution, is that what you're suggesting, Commissioner?
Yes, because we don't know why at this point, we don't know why it was specifically done for Corey.
Okay. Do you have any other comments, though, about the project? Are you prepared to?
I know, I would like to move that we adopt the staff recommendation.
Okay. Did you want to make a comment before we put that? Okay. Steve?
I'm generally in support of this project. I'm actually in support of Commissioner Bass's condition. I actually would like to propose a condition of my own. I actually really like the limestone tile, but I recognize that it's significantly more expensive than other materials they could have used, e.g. stucco. And I know sometimes things change in terms of, where budgets net out. I'd actually like to condition that if there is more than a 10% change in the use of limestone in the exterior, that it be brought back to commission in terms of exterior materials.
Okay, so that would be an added condition.
Yes.
David, anything?
I have nothing really to add. I think this is one of the applicant's better projects, and we've seen a lot of projects from the applicant. I don't mind the condition to keep the limestone there because I feel like that's what makes the project special. I don't mind the condition with respect to parking. So if someone would like to craft a motion.
I think that we have a motion. Commissioner Altschul claims that he made a motion to move the staff report as it
Looks
is.
on my screen.
Yeah. And I don't
is it
have
to
a
move
second.
did John move it as is, or does someone?
He's moving it as is.
Okay.
So if we have a second, fine. No second? No second. So there's no second, so your motion is off the table at this point. Is there another motion?
I still have my comments.
On the project or on the motion?
Project?
Okay, go ahead.
And if the motion, we don't have a second.
Motion.
We don't have a second.
There's a motion now? No, there isn't. It's off the table. There's no motion at this time, so go ahead with your comment.
Okay. First of all, I would agree with Commissioner Bass. That was one of my comments. I think that the language that was in the Corey project was very good language, and I agree, second, that it should be incorporated in all our projects going forward, because I think, as we all know, parking is a huge consideration in this town, and it's toughest on our residents. And I would also agree with Commissioner Jones that if there's a more than 10% change in the materials, that it should come back to commission. I would like to encourage the developer to look at those front windows, those opening windows and doors. And I've never seen this. It may or may not exist, but I'm kind of envisioning sort of a Dutch door scenario where you have an ability to have an open upper half where you can get ventilation without having to open the door. And that would, back to the security issues, I just somehow see somebody, you know, in the kitchen cooking and that door's wide open and somebody just walking into their house. And it, to me, is a security issue for both of those places. And yet that is an east-facing window and where you're going to be getting a lot of your ventilation. So I don't necessarily want to make it a condition, but it just seems like an important design element.
Yeah, we actually had a similar design to that earlier in the project, and it was asked to revise to the current design. So we're very amenable to and in agreement with your recommendation. We're happy to change those doors to a combination of a door with a Dutch door type design. And again, we can work with staff on a specific
Right, we don't have to condition that.
We understand. But we're agreeable to that
Would you
condition.
like us to condition that?
Yeah. Yeah, we do agree with you in terms of the merit of the request. Yes, we're happy to have that condition.
Okay.
There's a lay light on that front door. Maybe you can make the side light operable, and then you don't have to switch the door. And then that's an easy fix.
Yeah.
Okay,
legal will tell us what we have to condition or not condition
I think
in terms
there's
of the type of
code
windows.
Issues. I think there's code issues too with openings and so forth, right?
Well, but they have a door. They have a front door on the other side of the unit.
You guys could make a motion, you can make amendments, you can make conditions. Go ahead and make your motions. Who wants to go first?
Well, a couple of other things. Minor typer Jennifer on 6.18 meets 7.7, adding clumping bamboo to the project, but not running bamboo. Yes, I would agree with that. But as someone who has clumping bamboo in their house, it still kind of runs. So you still need barriers. So I would suggest that 7.7 be amended to include, yes, you can plant clumping bamboo, but it must still include adequate barrier system. Okay? 7.10 refers to a green wall. I couldn't find the green wall.
Well, if it's in there, then it's going to have to comply.
It's
a condition.
Chair,
Yes.
It's a standard condition. If there is a green wall element incorporated, we want to see that information. So if there isn't, then it doesn't apply.
Right.
Okay. I think that's the sum total of my comments. And so maybe I'll try a motion and incorporate the three pieces.
Go ahead.
Okay. I move that we move the project forward with the condition that the parking be amended to reflect the same language as in the Corey project, that any changes to the exterior materials of more than 10% be brought back to commission, and that the front opening doors be modified to improve security and airflow.
Okay, I'll just add a few clarifications. And Jennifer, jump in if you have anything else. So 10.6 would be revised with the language. Is that right? Oh. Actually, the better place to put the parking language is in 5.6, because that's the condition that deals with the construction mitigation plan.
It's 5.6Q.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll add the language to that, that Commissioner Bass read, and it was in the PowerPoint, so we have it. And then do we need to strike 10.6? No? Okay.
Oh, I forgot my own 7.7, which was the barrier on the bamboo.
Okay. Then, condition 7.7, running type bamboo shall not be used. I guess the first sentence, if bamboo is included in the landscape plan, a clumping type bamboo shall be used.
With an appropriate barrier system.
With an appropriate barrier system. And then we would add a new condition 10.7. Any change that is more than 10% change to the materials used, including the limestone, shall be approved by the Planning Commission.
That sounds right to me.
Okay.
Commissioner Altschul?
Well, I think the suggestion of approving by the Planning Commission of any changes in materials over 10% is a little bit burdensome, because in order to get on the agenda, that would take some time, and if you're in the middle of construction and something is necessary, it's very expensive that way. So I would suggest perhaps put that responsibility to the director, who for years has handled it quite well.
Would you be opposed to that?
I'm not sure I understood what the...
It would go to the planning director if it's over 10% change in the amount.
Well, I'm not sure that that meets your goal, Stacy, because right now, a 10% change can go to the director.
Right. I think what I don't want is for this building to come back as, be built as a stucco building. That's what
Well, the director can deny it if the director does not think it complies with what the commission approves. But if it's just something that has become a matter of necessity for one reason or another, I think the director, who has got tremendous competence, whoever he or she may be in the future, it would be appropriate.
So you would be opposed to this motion with that
I would, yes.
addendum?
I would agree with John. I mean, if we condition it correctly and we make clear that, the limestone was an integral part of the design, I think we can trust our director to carry that out appropriately.
You're
and
okay with
director
that?
doesn't necessarily mean director. The director can delegate.
Understood.
So would you be...
Yeah, I'm okay with that, as long as it's noted.
Motion.
So we would strike that portion.
So strike it entirely or have it subject to the director's approval?
Subject to the director.
Okay, so I want to make one clarification. 10.7 would be more than 10% change to the materials must be approved by the community development director. And then I forgot to mention the other condition that Commissioner Hoopengardner mentioned. 10.8 would be about that front patio and the doors.
Yes.
You read the language in, but that would be
Yes.
condition 10.8.
Yes.
Yeah.
It seems like the applicant has a...
Just to clarify, the condition 10.7 was, I don't think you included the word limestone, which I think was the intent of the condition. It just said materials. So we just want to make sure it's clear in the
Yes.
motion.
Okay, are we clear now? Commission, do you want to run it real quick by us, the 4 new things? Yeah, just one more time so we know what we're voting on.
So condition 5.6Q is going to be revised with the language read into the record about public parking.
Per Corey language.
Yes. And it was in the PowerPoint presentation,
Yeah.
so we have the exact language. 7.7, at the end of the first sentence, if bamboo is included in the landscape plan, a clumping type bamboo shall be used with appropriate barrier. Then there's a new condition 10.7 that any change to the materials, including the limestone that is more than 10%, shall be approved by the community to the satisfaction of the community development director. And then condition 10.8 is the language Commissioner Hoopengardner read about the door on the front patio.
Right. Okay. Could we have a vote then?
Is this a vote for the project and the motion, or just the motion?
Well, the motion is approving the project.
So before, because I know everybody's going to leave, and since staff is still here, taking the construction parking issue on a broader sense, I recently had a conversation with Councilmember Horvath, and she said that she had proposed to city staff that, because we have so much construction going on in East-West Hollywood, that if there are more projects, more than 2 or 3 projects happening on one street, that she would assign, or they would want to assign, a project manager to coordinate all those projects so you don't have conflict. Has that happened?
We're just now starting to see that actually take place, but we have been doing that on a place like Kings Road, where you had a lot of construction projects in close proximity to each other. So that was my job to coordinate, okay, you can do this day, or if you guys both needed to close a lane this week, why don't we try to do it on the same time? Whatever it might be, but that's part of my job duties.
That's great, because we have so much going, we've approved so many in this area. That's helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. David?
Commissioner Elchel? And the motion passes. It's unanimous.
Thank you.
The resolution the Planning Commission just approved, as amended, memorializes the Commission's final action on this matter. This action is subject to appeal to the City Council. Appeals must be submitted within 10 calendar days from this date to the City Clerk's office. Appeals must be in writing and accompanied by the required fees. The City Clerk's office can provide appeal forms and information about a waiver of fees.
I have a request from one of our commissioners for a break, so we're going to take a quick break, 7 minutes, and the clock. Commissioner Altschul, can you come forward so we can begin and go back into session? Back in session now with item 10B, zone text amendment regarding a short-term vacation rentals. We are going to follow the same process. We'll have a staff report first, and then we'll have the commission weigh in.
Thank you. Again, my name is Daniel Mick. I'm the Code Compliance Supervisor with the City of West Hollywood. The item before you tonight is zone text amendment that basically carves out an exception to the current prohibition on short-term rentals in the city to allow for hosted home sharing.
Dan, can you speak into the mic a little bit? Good.
Yes, sorry. In October 2015, the city council enacted clarified a prohibition on short-term rentals within our city. Short-term rentals is really just defined as the renting of all or part of any dwelling unit for less than 31 days. So again, that went into effect in October of 2015. As of March 2017, there were over 1,000 short-term rental ads for units here in our city. Staff has been collecting data over the past 2 years, looking at all the complaints, the cases, and we found that really all of the issues that we have with short-term rentals or the short-term rental complaints have something to do with either vacation rentals where there's no primary resident, or somebody that rents out their entire unit, goes away for a weekend, and that's where the complaints are coming from. The city, to the best of our knowledge, has never received a single complaint about somebody that's just renting out a spare room or a couch in their unit while they're living there during that guest stay. So we went to before the City Council in July 17th of this year with an update. This is how it's going. This is the situation for short-term rentals in our city, and recommended to City Council that maybe we do want to open up this prohibition a bit to allow for hosted home sharing. At that point in time, City Council did direct us to return with an item to carve out that exception to allow for a hosted home sharing business license to allow for somebody to just rent out a part of the unit or a spare room in their unit. So the proposed changes that we're going to bring back to City Council will include changes to the rent stabilization ordinance, the business license ordinance, and the zoning code. The business license portion was heard in front of the Business License Commission this past Tuesday. Next Thursday, the 12th, the Rent Stabilization Commission will hear their portion of it. And tonight, we're asking you to review the proposed amendments to the zoning code. So there's a few different changes that we're looking at. Here. The first really is in the table 2-5 in 1906-030, basically listing home sharing pursuant to Chapter 5.66, adding that to the table. And with that, we'll have a change to note number 1 that clarifies or other permit or license, which would require any home sharing person that engages in home sharing, would have to get the requisite business license. The Chapter 19 or subsection 1936-331 is the prohibition on current short-term rentals. That's what we currently have. We'd like to strike the word vacation from the title because not all short-term rentals have anything to do with vacations. We may want to make a couple different changes there. We'd like to add the words facilitate an offer to the language that says no person or entity shall offer, facilitate an offer or provide a dwelling unit or any portion thereof, ... That's to make sure that if we find that people are engaging in short-term rental brokering, you know, I have this person that wants to rent a short-term rental, I have this person that's offering one for rent, I will put you two together for a fee. We want to make sure that they can be held accountable for their role in this unlawful activity. And then the final change would really be carving out that exception to allow for hosted home sharing in conjunction with a business license that's required by Chapter 5.66 of the Business License Code. And I believe with that, if you have any questions, I'm available.
I do have some questions. Since I'm chair, I'll have to go first. How are you going to enforce this? That's what I want to know, is how are you going to enforce this? And what are the consequences? Is there a fee structure for any violation of this? Or
when you say
people are, like you said, there's thousands of people in the city that are offering their rooms for rent right now. And how are you going to get them to come and get a license and do this? Or what are you going to do if you find out that they're not complying?
There are two different fees that are, or fines that are associated with this whole proposed ordinance. If you're violating 1936-331, which is in the zoning code, that means that you're engaging in short-term rental, any sort, without a license. Mm-hmm. Most of the short-term rentals that are taking place in our city, roughly 80% or so, are full unit rentals. So there is no on-site primary resident, or it's just, there's no primary resident at all. It's because it's just basically turning into a hotel room. When we find that out, we've contracted with a company called Host Compliance. This is what they do. They scour all the 15 top websites. They can scrub the data, get into the developer's information behind the website, pull out data, provide that to us, and it'll give us generally the address, the name of the host, how many or how often it's being rented, the specific web address for that particular ad, any other ads they might have across other platforms. It provides it to us in a way that now we can ideally issue citations. If we're issuing citations for the current prohibition on short-term rentals, the fines are exceptionally large. And they were created that, intentionally like that. I believe the first violation is 400% of the nightly rental rates times the minimum number of days. So if you're renting a place out for $300 a night, which is not uncommon, let's say it's a 5-day minimum. That's what, 1,200 times 5. That's $6,000 citation. That's no longer a cost of doing business. Mm-hmm. Second violation is 600%. Third violation is 800%. We've issued several citations. That new fee structure went into effect in July of this year. The people that have received those citations are not happy with us for good reason.
So this citation issue is pretty new, enforcing this at this point.
This particular fee structure. The one before that, we had 200, 400, or 200, 300, 400% of just the nightly rate. But we changed it. We thought that there was still not strong enough, so we included, higher percentages times the nightly rate. So it's been an ongoing, evolving process over the past 2 years. I think in the past 2 years we've had 3 different fee structures, and we're really happy with this one.
Okay, so you're going to make the public aware that this is what's going on, and that there's this compliance issue, and what the cost of doing that kind of business is?
Absolutely. It's on the city's website. It's for anybody to see. It's not hidden. And as part of this, we do plan on sending a mailer out to every address in the city, letting them know, hey, here's the changes for short-term rentals. We're going to put them on notice right up front. If you want to do this, come talk to Dan. We'll see what we can do to help you get legal. But if you continue doing it without the requisite license, here's your penalties.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. Just to follow up, what was the name of the service that helps you guys find it? The only reason I'm asking is because, to take a step back, as a landlord, sometimes you're suspicious that it's happening and you're on your property, but you can't. It's difficult to go to a tenant and be like, hey, are you renting this out on Airbnb or whatever? So, is there a way for landlords to get access to a service like that to figure out if that's happening under their nose? So, because I'm assuming the landlord gets hit with the fine, right? Not the, or is it a tenant, or how does it work?
It's whoever we can determine is engaging in the home sharing. If
Got
it's
it.
the landlord that's has a spare unit, the landlord's going to receive the fine.
Right.
But if it's the tenant who is doing something unlawful, then it's the tenant that's going to receive the fine. And to be perfectly honest, we can't enforce 100% of this. Some people are just really good at hiding their tracks. But we're actually getting pretty good at finding who these people are, and Host Compliance, which is the company that we're referring to, that's what they do. We just went under contract with them a few weeks ago, so we're just gearing that up. But if you look at a lot of the other cities, Hermosa Beach is a prime example. They've seen their short-term rental listings, the numbers drop precipitously.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Altschul?
Dan, has there been a consideration for a separate fine schedule or separate civil remedy schedule for owners who are not the primary occupant of the subject property that are renting it out? No, they're not there. They're living in Hermosa Beach, or they're living in downtown Los Angeles. They own a place here and they're renting it out on a short-term schedule.
We haven't really, if I'm understanding what you're saying is, if I'm understanding what you're saying, we haven't really considered a separate fee schedule for that, or a fine schedule, because a violation of 1936-331 is a violation. To engage in any type of home sharing, you're going to need to get a license under the proposed ordinance. If you get a license, you violate a operating condition there, then it's a much smaller fine. But if you're violating 1936-331, there is one flat rate that's really set by whatever you are charging your nightly rate at.
Is on the application for the license, is it going to say that the landlord, the host, must be in residence at all times?
Yes, they don't have to be in the residence at all times. They just have to reside in the unit.
In residence at all times,
right?
Not in the residence.
Exactly. I believe you were provided a copy of the proposed ordinance. We do want to make sure we do want to allow licensees to go about their day-to-day business if they need to go to work.
Yes, but they need to put their head on a pillow under the same roof.
Correct. We're going to have something in there. They must spend at least, I think the city attorney recommended 4 hours per 24-hour period in the unit. I believe that's what was recommended.
And also in your report, you alluded to talked about tenants who are renting out their space probably without the landlord's or the owner's knowledge. What about fines and civil penalties for that?
If they're part of the application process, they're going to have to certify that they do have the property owner's permission. That will be out there.
They're not going to get a license, the tenant.
I'm sorry?
A tenant who does it is not going to apply for a license.
Then in violation.
Correct, and then they would be subject to these heavy fines because they wouldn't be doing it in conjunction with Chapter 5.66.
And is there something that could be looked at so that part of the remedies, part of the financial remedies could go back to the landlord because they didn't have the landlord's permission to do it?
I would have to refer to the city attorney on that one. That's outside of my scope of knowledge.
Yeah.
That's not what's proposed right now because the illegal activity is the tenant. Mm-hmm. It's the tenant who's responsible for putting it on the website and doing this activity that violates the code. So the way it's set up right now, you're supposed to get, if you want to do home share legally, you have to get permission from your landlord if you are a renter. And as Dan mentioned, if you don't do that, you're subject to the higher penalties because you're operating without a license. What? So it's not tied to the landlord at the moment.
No, but perhaps something should be looked at so that doing it without the landlord's permission, and perhaps if it's an out-of-state or an out-of-country landlord, the landlord doesn't even know about it, that there's some reparation for the landlord also.
I mean, that's a tough thing because it's being done without their knowledge. But I hear what you're saying, that they should be
I think
watching their...
To follow up with what John's saying, part of the concern...
give them money to the landlord? Yes.
Yeah, because part of the...
I didn't understand that.
Part of the concern for a landlord is, you have insurance requirements, right? Well, let's just say all of a sudden you didn't vet whoever's staying at the property, and they do some other illicit activity that might injure someone, excess wear and tear that they weren't planning on having. All these are considerations for landlords, and so I see what John's doing, what John's going for here.
Yeah,
Penalizing the tenant, and
I've known people for years who have rented apartments in the city and not lived in them, subletted them out for much more money than they're paying, and the landlords are not aware. And it's a definite
something to
issue.
consider in the
So I would like that.
scheme
I would
of
like
enforcement.
you guys to consider that.
I have a question.
Yes,
Commissioner. In here, the language you're saying is that allow residents to rent a room or part of a room in their primary residence. Does this include granny flats and external units that are part of your primary residence?
It would include those. So if you have a single-family residence with an accessory dwelling unit, let's say, in the back, that's all considered one unit. So you would be able to rent that accessory unit while you remain in the main house.
So as a related question then, at $300 a night, that's over $100,000 a year in income. That is incentive for me to build a granny flat and rent it out. Do we have any thoughts about limitations on construction purely for hotel purposes and say that if you build a granny flat in West Hollywood, you have limitations the first X number of years in terms of renting it out on a hotel basis?
That's not something we've considered.
There's actually an ordinance coming before you on the next Planning Commission agenda to address recent changes to the state law related to these accessory dwelling units. And in some ways, you'll learn about this next meeting, but the state has really restricted our authority on what we can do with these second units and wants to encourage them for more housing opportunities. So that's a conversation for next time.
But that's housing, not hotels.
Correct. They still have to follow our short-term rental ordinance.
So they're still limited to the 90 days.
Correct.
Right, and I have no issues with when we move forward to City Council. Maybe we do want to address or put a portion in there for where it's prohibited, and maybe we want to call out something like that for this particular use, because we wouldn't be violating the ADU code. We would just say you can't use your ADU for short-term rentals, correct?
Might even already be in there, but that's for the ordinance that we're going to talk about next month.
Questions?
I guess I just want to follow up on Lynn's, because I'm not familiar enough with what our current policy is in the city in terms of accessory dwelling units. Like, if I own a home, which I don't, but if I did, and I had a unit in the back, like, how are accessory units considered part of long-term housing? I guess is what I'm asking. Do they have to have a separate address? Do they have to be, is there a process someone has to go through with the city? Like, how is that designated?
So let's say you have a single-family home and you build an accessory dwelling unit in the back. You are not obligated to rent out that space, but you're also not allowed to separately sell it. So it remains part of that same parcel number. So ultimately, when you do decide to rent out the unit, let's say today, you would be limited in only renting out that unit for a minimum of 31 days or more.
So not short-term then?
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Altschul?
What about how do you interact or deal with the situation where condominiums in their CC&Rs prohibit short-term rentals?
Then that would not be allowed. Again, we have in the business license provisions where it's prohibited. It does call out, I think exactly where it is. It actually 566.020, home sharing is prohibited in any common interest development where home sharing is not allowed. So they would just be prohibited.
Would you consider looking at putting in the application for the license? Do you live in a condominium? Yes, no. Does your condominium governing documents allow this? Yes or no?
It's absolutely something that we can consider.
Please do.
That was part of the Business License Commission's recommendation on Tuesday night too.
That was the same concept, yeah, because it's happening.
But the point of the ordinance is that the HOA should control, so if the HOA doesn't want it, you shouldn't be allowed to do it, and if your landlord doesn't want it, you shouldn't be allowed to do it. That's
Correct.
the point of the ordinance.
I would suggest you actually just say, give us a copy of your CC&Rs as part of your application.
We're looking at doing online permitting to make everything simple and easy, because the one thing we don't want to, really the part of the goal of this is to help those people that are really just doing home sharing in its truest sense, where you're just renting out a couch or a spare bedroom, to bring them into the light. You know, we don't want to suppress them and keep them, you know, in the dark, operating in violation of the law. We want to allow them to come forward. We want to educate them as much as possible during the process that, you know, you can't do that. If you're a renter, you can't do this without your landlord's permission. If you do it without your landlord's permission, you're setting yourself up for failure. I mean, you may be risking your housing. Doesn't matter if you're paying market rate or below market rate. If you're a condo owner, if you're doing something in violation of CC&Rs, you're risking some sort of legal action by the HOA. You cannot do this. But the city, I mean, we don't want to necessarily get into the issue of, yes, you can do this, no, you can't in this particular building. At some point in time, the HOA board needs to control their own destiny and what they're doing. And by calling out, you can't do it in an HOA or in a place where the HOA does not allow for it, we're leaving that door open for the HOA to handle it themselves.
One of the reasons I asked the question about how do you enforce this is because in condominium buildings in particular that I'm aware of, there are homeowners who are renting out short-term rental to people, and when other homeowners in the building say, where are you going, or what are you doing here? They'll say, oh, I'm a guest of so-and-so, or I'm a cousin of so-and-so, and there's nothing you can do at that point. How do you check it out? So people are doing it, and it's sort of going to be hard to follow through, and code compliance, you've got your hands full.
We will have our hands full, and we have had our hands full over the past 2 years. For the most part, we probably won't see too many of these issues where we have to show up on site in person at a short-term rental, because, yeah, I mean, unless it's a 200-person blowout, happening somewhere. When we show up, we have it written where if code compliance, sheriffs, fire get called out to the scene, first of all, if they're doing it with a license, they will have provided us their contact information. And once any city official has contacted them, they need to show up on site in person within 60 minutes. So that would largely eliminate the people that are just renting out and just going out to Palm Springs. They're not going to be able to get back here in time. We have flexibility on the 60 minutes, of course. I mean, if they contact us, I'm just stuck on the 405, I'll be there in an hour and a half. Okay, we can work with you on things like that. But it's written in a way that should theoretically prevent people from, if everybody's operating according to what the law actually requires, would prevent those situations from happening.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions?
I have some questions. I have at least one question.
We also have commissioners that we haven't yet had public weigh in on this too, so we'll give them a chance. But
yeah,
go ahead.
I think that I do
Adam.
need to ask this question before public.
Good.
And before the public comments, I'm not required to disclose, but I want to mention that I did go to the Business License Commission on Tuesday night and listen to their entire conversation. I've met with representatives from Airbnb as well as several hosts to try to gather some information to be more informed on this. So I just want to put that out there. My question is, in the language we're considering tonight, the phrase facilitate an offer, and we discussed this by phone, but the way I read that is if you facilitate an offer, that might be one of the platforms, and you explained other circumstances in your description tonight, but I want to just understand, is that a term we could use? I understand that there are going to be platforms that are going to be willing to work with us, and it doesn't behoove us as a city to create an adversarial relationship, but I also imagine that there'll be platforms that might be less likely to work with us, and would this be a tool we could use in those circumstances based on discretion?
Yeah, I don't see why we couldn't. That was not the intent when I first proposed that language, but it could be looked at that way. I guess one thing that I haven't mentioned in this, but I did on Tuesday night at the Business License Commission, is that I've been meeting with Airbnb over the past few months. I intentionally did not include any regulations or operating conditions for the short-term rental platforms in the business license code because they've been very willing to work with us to figure out, how can they meet the city's needs for enforcement purposes in a way that we don't, in matters where we don't have to write just a broad ordinance that would pretty much set them up for failure that they could not possibly meet. I could very easily write an ordinance that says, short-term rental platforms can only list listings with the business license number. That's easy for me to do. It's also going to subject them to $500 fine or per listing, and it's not really feasible, especially when you're talking about their business model is in the cloud. It's in the ether.
I'm certainly not suggesting that we go with a big stick, because I don't think that has worked with our current ordinance. I think our current ordinance is falling short because we have over 900 listings. And one thing I heard at the Business License Commission the other night was that 90-day restriction. Why are we restricting it down to 90 days? And I kept thinking in my head, restriction right now is 0. So we're actually increasing it to 90, which we can have a conversation about that later, because I don't want to get into, I want to keep this to a question, and which I failed to do. But my question really is whether we could use that. Let's say all the platforms are working with us, providing you with the information you need to be effective at enforcement, but there's just one that won't work with us, and I want us to have some tools there for a completely adversarial relationship.
Yeah, we've actually...
It would encourage, I think, others to work with us.
Agreed. We're working on trying to come up with some sort of language that will return to amend the business license ordinance that deals specifically with the platforms themselves. And I'm actually very encouraged, and they've been a willing participant over the past few months. When it comes down to individual listings, people just won't get it if that's part of the concern. Short-term Airbnb has been working with us is saying, listen, if you want to do an administrative subpoena, we'll absolutely comply with that to provide us more information than we could get just from host compliance. But we want to make sure that we're not issuing 1,000 administrative subpoenas. I mean, that's not quite right, if that makes sense. I mean, we still have a job to do. But that would be used in the worst case scenario. But we will be returning with something that works for all possible platforms, or as many as we can possibly get. And if we need to, this is going to be a work in progress. We're going to keep coming back, amending it as we learn more, because this is new territory for us.
Thank you.
Any other comments at this point? Then we'll have the public come. We have several speakers. Each speaker will be given 2 minutes. Please state, when you come to the podium, please state your full name and city of residence. And first speaker will be Manny Rodriguez, followed by Kevin Runke.
Hello, commissioners. My name is Manny Rodriguez. I live in West Hollywood. I believe this short-term rental ordinance is well-built and very comprehensive. As is, it reinforces the rights and expectation that homeowners have for their property, and at the same time protects residential neighborhoods from the abuse and chaos caused by reckless and absent property owners. It is clear that hosted home sharing is not the problem. This ordinance focuses all compliance resources directly at the real problem. It is strict, it is enforceable, and it is punitive. And by the way, Commissioner Hoopen-Gardner, I think there's very few granny flats or auxiliary buildings in West Hollywood that are legal. And an auxiliary building can't have a kitchen. Furthermore, you wouldn't rent it for for the entire year at $100,000 a year because there's a cap at 90. So, and that's what I'm most curious to hear you deliberate about. The 90-day cap, I'm not sure really what benefit that brings to the community. Why isn't it 120? Why isn't it 180? That's really what I'd like to see you question in your deliberation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. Next is Kevin Brunke, followed by Lauren.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Kevin Brunke. I'm a community organizer for Airbnb's Southern California mobilization team. On behalf of Airbnb, I'd like to commend city leaders for addressing this important issue and joining the hundreds of jurisdictions around the country who have recognized the economic benefits that home sharing provides for residents, businesses, and local governments. Tonight, you will hear from members of our host community who rely on home sharing to cover the cost of everything from their mortgage and rent to medical bills and groceries. The typical host in West Hollywood earns a little more than $9,000 a year sharing their home, and the vast majority share their home in which they live. In addition to helping families make ends meet, home sharing brings new visitors to West Hollywood, which in turn means more customers for local small businesses and restaurants. Over the last 12 months, our host community in West Hollywood welcomed nearly 55,000 guests to the city, and more than 90% of hosts recommended small businesses to their guests. At a time when brick and mortar stores in the community are struggling to keep up with competition from online retailers, home sharing is bringing customers and foot traffic to neighborhood businesses. To capitalize on these economic benefits, we ask that you reconsider the arbitrary 90-day cap on hosted stays. The vast majority of our hosts are responsible neighbors who share their primary home to earn a little extra money. Restricting the number of days they can rent out their home does little to address nuisance or quality of life issues. It only deprives these hosts of the income they rely on to make ends meet and robs the city of valuable economic activity generated from tourism to the greater LA area. We know from working with other cities around the world that the most successful legislation is both reasonable and fair. Although we are not the only home sharing platform operating in West Hollywood, we are the only one actively engaged in working with city leaders to create sensible regulations that address key community concerns and promote the economic benefits of home sharing. We look forward to working with you and other city leaders on this important issue. Thank you for your time and the opportunity to speak here tonight.
Thank you. Lauren, followed by John Fitzgerald Keitel.
Good evening, Commissioners, and thank you for your time. My name is Lauren Lewis, and I have lived in West Hollywood on and off since the age of 12. I even attended Fairfax High School with one of the Jackson Five. I've resided in many other places, including New York, Chicago, England, San Diego, and Westlake Village, but think West Hollywood is the best place to live. I had a long and miserable marriage, during which time I raised two beautiful children and did tons of volunteer and fundraising work and modeled, which I'm hardly in demand for now. Automation and ageism has pretty much cut me from the job market. I don't know if you've heard the statistic that General Motors at one point had a valuation of $6 billion with 600,000 employees. Facebook has the same valuation with 6,000 employees. Jobs are disappearing. I couldn't even get hired at Target, and I'm summa cum laude from UCLA. Per my divorce decree, I was to receive alimony for life. My ex has been unable to give me a cent for over 5 years now. It's been very tough for many of us. And then came Airbnb. I have an extra room and bath in my condo and an additional parking space, though 90% of my guests don't use it. Living alone, I'm quite cautious, so screen potential guests carefully on top of the verification process Airbnb does, and I have met the most wonderful people from all over the world, many of whom will be lifelong friends. Learning and sharing about different cultures, in my humble opinion, is an important step in maintaining peace. And truth be told, I get lonely living alone. I can't rent out the other bedroom because my son, who lives in New York, comes to visit a few times a year, and I wouldn't have a place to put him. I never thought I'd find myself in this situation, and Airbnb has been a godsend. Please recognize how people like myself could barely make ends meet without it, and I respectfully ask that you not put a cap and limit the number of nights I can do this. In addition, due to the traffic in LA, it might be hard to get home within an hour, but I heard that you might allow that if we call in.
Thank you.
This would definitely help me age in place.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you. Brad Keisler, followed by John Fitzgerald Keitel.
Good evening.
I'm Brad Kiesler, a longtime resident of West Hollywood, and I've been doing Airbnb for quite a while now. I'm glad you're addressing all of this. One of my concerns is I live alone. I have a spare bedroom, and I like the extra security this gives me. A month ago, I fell, well, on September 1st, I fell during the middle of the night, and I woke up unconscious on the floor. I had hit my eye here and other abrasions and stuff. And I thought to myself, well, you know, what if it had been worse, and this had, well, anyway, I'll talk about that later. Anyway, I'm glad to have somebody on the premises, so it's kind of a safety issue to me. The extra money is great, and that's all good. I'm not as desperate as some people here with needing the extra money. I'm just thinking, you know, out of all of the hosts, 900 you have in West Hollywood, how many cause a problem? It's a very small minority, and this is the squeaky wheel that sort of gathers all the attention. But 99% of us, I don't know how many are really abusing the system. So I'm just saying, what if I had gone 90 days and then I'm on 91 and that's when I fell on the floor, you know, and I don't have anybody around to, you know, when I came to, you know, if I came to. So there's ways to deal with the negative people, and don't punish the rest of us. And this 90 days also, I've been coming to all of the Airbnb meetings. I mean, about Airbnb with all the I've been to the all the city council meetings, and I don't remember that 90 days ever coming up as a specific recommendation. So I would say no caps, and then if you have a problem after a trial period, then go back to restricting the number of days. But I thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. John Fitzgerald Keitel, followed by, and we're having a little trouble with the spelling, MJ Decre.
Hi, I'm John. I've been a resident in West Hollywood since 1994. And before that, opened up one of the first cafes, the Sixth Gallery, with my boyfriend at the time. I don't know if you remember it. Chi LaRue's now occupies the spot. But back then, you couldn't have outdoor dining. You couldn't open a cafe because you had too many requirements with bathrooms and everything, like parking, and a lot of work went into changing that. There was resistance to it, you know? But it changed, and we were able to get all this wonderful outdoor dining, and it became the creative city. And I just have to tell you, you know, Lindsay recently held an event at the Andaz, because I guess there's like the majority of the residents of West Hollywood are under 40 or 43. And she wanted to appeal to them because they're not engaged civically. And I just have to tell you, I don't think this represents their city. I don't think the business licensing meeting represented their city either. I think you all need to do some homework, because I don't think you guys, and you either, give me the sense that you understand at all what Airbnb or the new economy is all about. You are trying to put something that doesn't belong into a square peg into a round hole. It just doesn't work. It's not a business, it's an ecosystem, okay? What Airbnb allows me to do as a documentary filmmaker is without it, and the times have changed post-2008. You have to piece together your incomes, and if it wasn't for things like Rover, which is like the Airbnb for dogs, or Thumbtack.com, which is where I get all my editing now, my work in film, or Airbnb, you know, I wouldn't, the old jobs don't exist. LinkedIn just had an article, the 9-to-5 job is dead. So I list my place, I vet the people that come in, I meet them, we have extensive online conversations before they come. I show them around. They come, they stay 2, 3, maybe 1 day. They spend lots of money in West Hollywood, and they get to, and they can do it at an affordable rate. So for 120 bucks as opposed to the average price of $235. So I really encourage you to like stop and think about what Airbnb is and stop trying to fit the old paradigm into the new. So thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
I think what's going on here, I'm not happy that you guys took this up again. This is a mess.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Is that MJ? Come on up. Sorry. Tell us your name, and if you would, please spell it so we have it correct in our minutes.
Respected commissioners, my name is Deri, D-E-R-I, and Andy. It's E-N-D-R-E, so it's not quite well pronounced. I am thinking that the public, which was talking before me, has almost took care of everything what should have been taken care. However, what has been not emphasized, that indeed, I do agree that there is a need for regulation. There is, but not for restriction. The regulation should certainly take care of the HOE interests. If they permit, you can do it. If they don't permit, you can't do it. But it is quite simple. What is, according to my belief, is more important is where it is permissible, there how to regulate. We should not restrict to 90-day, 100-day, 200-day, whichever. The more visitors are coming to the town, the more money they are bringing. They buy things, they pay tax. They are here, they spend their money here. That is why they are coming. And I sincerely believe that the respected commission should support this idea, not restrict the idea. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is Andrea D., followed by Joe. And if you could give us your full names, it would be helpful. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Andrea Derazinski, and as a rent-controlled tenant, I have been on a lease with my mom for 22 years. And when she passed away 8 years ago, I signed a new lease at 25% greater rent. So I have now lived in the apartment 8 years with my 2 children. My daughter is 19, my son is 14. Both attend school in Santa Monica College and Hollywood High. After several roommates that could not pay their share of the rent, I resorted to Airbnb with my landlord's permission. I discovered a whole new experience of quality people who have stayed with me from all over the world, a princess from Italy, and recently a World Cup soccer player. I rent my master bedroom and ensuite bathroom. I provide parking for the rare guest that rents a car. Many guests come for different reasons, from business to visiting family to relocation. I spend 20 to 30 minutes and I get them all situated and let them know where everything is, where they can go shopping, where the grocery store is, where the museums are. And for me, this is a job. And I have found that my children have flourished with the experience that they get from many different cultures and languages. I wouldn't be able to maintain this longtime resident without being a full-time host. This is an essential portion of my income. I honestly have no idea how I would continue to provide for my children without this opportunity. I recommend that you do not put a cap on this, because my life is not on a cap. I live at a 365 days a year, and my children are depending on this. In addition to the 60-minute rule about getting back, we live in a city where, in a 12-mile diameter from my house, downtown to Santa Monica, if any of you can get back to my apartment from downtown in 60 minutes, I want your car. It's not an easy task, and we all know that. So, but you already said that there was some flexibility. So I thank you for taking the time to listen to all of us tonight and making your recommendations.
Thank you, Andrea. Joe?
Good evening. My name is Joe Grech. I've lived in this area since 1986, and I am a retired teacher of 78 years old. And when I was about to retire, I noticed the pension would not be enough, and I'm not in such great health that I can get another job. So I bought a condo that is in a very desirable location, not far from where I've lived for the past 30 years or so. And with the idea of renting out a spare bedroom with its own shower and everything, and at the same time have some company. I was a teacher of history, and that's one of the things that attracts a lot of my visitors. I used to do this as a young man, as a university of people from Europe. I'm originally from there, and it seems like I'm doing the same thing now, but it's helping me pay my living expenses. I don't see what the fuss is about, because a lot of the things that were mentioned are already covered by law regarding the owners of a place, if they have a tenant renting, subleasing, or whatever, that's already taken care of. I don't know why it should involve people like me who have a spare room, want to rent it out to people. Most of my guests are young students from all over the world, and in years of doing this, I've never had a bad experience. Most of them take Uber or public transportation. They spend money attending to whatever their interests are. And I thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. David, do we have some people, do you want to speak as people opposing?
Yes, there's one person that chose not to speak, and they wanted the record read into their view read into the record. They opposed staff's recommendation, Ness Twina.
Thank you. Okay, comments from commissioners? Discussion. John?
I think it's wonderful that we're making progress in this direction, and I believe that the concept should go forward, and I think that what you guys are doing is fantastic. I question the 90-day cap. Why would we need a 90-day cap? Do you have any thoughts about that?
I was in our July 17th meeting with City Council. That's where that direction came from. The initial, that's really where it came from. It is a difficult thing to enforce, but that was part of the recommendation or the direction from City Council.
I think maybe the idea might have been to spread around the activity amongst those many people that wanted. I don't know. I can't think of any other idea as to why, but I think the market should drive who gets the guests and who doesn't get the guests. So I think it should be unlimited, at least, or at least more than 90 days. Otherwise, I think your thoughts, augmented by some of the ideas we gave you, I think are just fine.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
First of all, I'm very curious because there's no hoteliers here to speak on this subject. And what has been your contact and interaction with them on this subject?
We've actually met with the hoteliers to discuss this issue. The hosted home sharing, again, just renting out a couch or a spare bedroom, they do not view as a competitor for them. I believe our business development manager actually met with them to go over all this. They are in support of what we've been given the direction to move forward with.
Because I think, I'm looking at both sides of the equation here, and hotels have to pay bed tax, they have to provide security, they have fire and safety requirements that they have to meet that create a considerable amount of overhead, which makes them, in the original Airbnb type environment, home share environment, not competitive in many respects. Obviously, they have more amenities, they have certain, but when you start talking about 1,000 units, then we're really looking at a competitor to hotels who we have very strict requirements on. I absolutely hear everyone in the audience and understand and think it's a great opportunity. As long as the hoteliers are in agreement that the home share component isn't competition, and I think we're having equal requirements, plus or minus, I personally don't have a problem with raising the cap, as long as we keep that in a very clear understanding.
I'm just questioning. I'm looking at the zone text amendment that you proposed, and I don't see anything in that amendment specifically saying 90 days. The only direction I see is from a council member Meister who suggested that it be restricted to 90 days. So is it in here that I'm just not seeing it? Where is it? Sorry.
Number 8 under 566.050.
Is that in the Business License Commission?
So the 90-day language is actually found in the business license language.
Oh, in the
that's
business
not
license
included directly.
language.
It was just referenced in the staff
Oh,
report.
okay. I'm sorry, I missed that. Okay. So that could or could not be part of this, is that right? As our recommendation to council?
I think as part of your recommendation, it's not part of the language in the zoning code, but if the commission felt as a body that they wanted to recommend a higher number, you could certainly, we could write that in
Or
the
no
resolution.
number.
Or no number, you could write that in the resolution. So they know your feelings about it.
Great.
I have some thoughts on this.
Okay.
And I.
Oh, excuse me, I thought it was Jerry speaking.
I'm sorry.
Commissioner Bass, that's okay.
So I supported council initially when they outlawed all home share or all short-term rentals, and that was based purely on my experience as a renter and the just how incredibly impactful it was on me as a neighbor. And so I supported that, but I have moved quite a bit on this issue in the subsequent months and years. And so some of the things I've discovered, and I asked Airbnb for some numbers earlier today, that the median number of nights, and I hope I get these numbers correct, but I think I did, median number of nights for current West Hollywood rentals, all of them illegal, are 67 nights per year. So 90 wouldn't stop most of those. However, 40%, they tell me 40% are over 120 nights per year, and 26% are 180 nights per year. And one of the hosts I had a very long conversation with by phone last night, who's, I believe, one of our responsible West Hollywood short-term rental participants, hosts, tells me that he's at about 120 nights this year to date, to 2017. So I think that the number needs to be higher, although that wouldn't affect most, but I really resist the idea that we do no cap, because we have a housing crisis in this region, and if somebody wants to have somebody in their unit 300 plus nights a year, get a roommate and provide housing for people who live here. That's my feeling. So I think that if you're really going to be renting a unit for that many nights a year, that there's an option available to you that will bring income, but we should be more liberal than 90. I think that doesn't meet the needs of our residents. So that's where I'm at. I don't know what that number is, but I would support a motion that would call on council to increase it. I'm glad to hear that they're going to have more than 60 minutes if they're within the spirit of the law. I think that's incredibly important. And I think that this is a moving target. I think that we've relied on hotels for a lot of years, and that's kind of a financial backbone of the city to some degree, or to a large degree. I like the idea that we finally, under this proposal, will start to collect taxes from the folks who are doing Airbnb. So that's over $1 million a year that we're missing out on right now. So I think we do need to start moving this direction. I think it speaks volumes to the fact that when this ordinance came up a couple of years ago, none of the short-term rental folks would even meet with the city, and now we have representatives here in the room, many of them. I don't know that I'm going to support this recommendation, but I don't think that this is the end result. I think this is taking the next step, and I think we'll probably while the 7 of us are still here, we'll probably revisit it again in the next couple of years. So that's where I'm at, and I would like to hear where the rest of you are, because as you can hear, I'm still able to move.
Commissioner Cavallaro.
Yeah, I came in here thinking that I had a pretty clear or all my questions answered, but after hearing all the public speakers, I'm not so clear on it any longer. For me, I see the hotel person and the Airbnb person as two different customers. I'm not really worried about the hotels, but what I am worried about is just housing in West Hollywood. And I understand that the 90-day limitation kind of restricts it from being a short-term rental, but it also doesn't take a potential unit off the market for a resident. And in the end, we're approving all these apartment buildings and complexes to create housing. So my question would be, why do the Airbnbers not rent out that room on a yearly basis? But I also understand the profits involved with doing short-term rentals are potentially better than having a roommate. So at this point, I'm not so sure I can support this 90-day issue, but only because I'm concerned about housing in the city and how Airbnb takes housing away from us.
So when you say you don't know if you can support the 90-day, you would want it to be shorter or longer?
I'd like to hear some other comments on this. Does
Okay.
anybody else think about this as a housing issue?
Yes. Commissioner Altschul?
If you are a single-family homeowner or a condominium homeowner, your destiny and what you do is basically up to you. If you are renting an apartment, your landlord has something to say about it. And I suspect 100%, if not that, 98% of the landlords would oppose your renting out your spare bedroom because you're getting the income and they're not. And you're paying perhaps a rent-stabilized rent, and here you could be potentially making more money than you're paying to your landlord. So I don't think that something like that is going to work. I don't know that it would be taking housing away from people that need it, because again, people that own their own units, their own homes, their own condominiums, unless there is an incentive like the Airbnb model, I don't believe they're going to be renting out their spare bedrooms.
As a student, when I first moved to Los Angeles, I relied on someone with a condo who rented the extra bedroom while I went to school. So, and it was a posting out at UCLA, and it's not the same model, but it did provide housing.
That condo was not subject to rent control.
Correct. So then do we limit this to rent control?
Well, you can't expect somebody who lives in a rent-controlled apartment and rents to a tenant who pays $562.34 a month and gets a 1.25 annual increase to be allowed to rent out his half of his room or whatever for $350 a night.
And I just, a concrete example, the place I lived immediately before my current apartment was just outside West Hollywood on Martell, just north of Beverly. I rented a room in somebody's home.
Yep.
Since I've moved out of there, it's been used as short-term rental exclusively. So that's a unit that was affordable to me when I moved to Los Angeles, working for a nonprofit, that is now not available to a full-time renter, but is used as short-term rental. And I think he's a responsible one. He should be able to do it. He can afford to do it just part-time.
Sue?
Yes, David.
So I'd like to chime in. I agree with Commissioner Hoopengarner and Commissioner Bass. Starting with Commissioner Bass's comments, first things first, and I know you work in the city of LA, or you worked in the city of LA. There is a really big housing crisis, and we keep bringing this up in the context of a lot of these multifamily projects, but I don't think people understand. There's a really big housing crisis in Southern California, and taking beds, period, off the market for short-term rentals contributes to that. I don't know if everyone's aware, but apparently I think it was last week on Monday, the city of LA just implemented a new kind of overlay zone depending on whether or not you're closer to transit, where they're trying to get density way up and parking requirements way down just to get more units built. So to that end, and in response to Commissioner Cavallero's conundrum with respect to the number of days, I'm okay with 90 days because it's enough to, if somebody has access to a unit and they want to rent out a bedroom in their unit, it's enough to where, for several months a year they could do that, but it doesn't, necessarily take it off the market. But with respect to what Commissioner Altschul was mentioning, if you go on RadPad, which is a apartment rental website, not a short-term rental website, one of the things you see on there a lot is people renting out rooms on a long-term basis, i.e., hey, you can come in and be my roommate for $1,000 a month, right? And they might be in a rent-controlled. Actually, I had a similar situation where I have a tenant in a rent-controlled unit that's $1,000 below market, and they rented out their spare bedroom to another tenant, and I was fine with that. That guy found housing, and she met a need, and we vetted him, and it was fine. With respect to Commissioner Hoopengarner's comments, we hold our hoteliers at to a very high standard, and I think you kind of see this with Uber, and that's a whole other mess that I'm not going to get into with respect to how they're regulated and licensed, but that's neither here nor there. But we have these hoteliers that have been operating in our city since before it was a city, and the fact that they're not necessarily, they're held to, like you said, the fire life safety standards, certain insurance requirements, so on and so forth. We make sure that everything is built to code, that it's habitable for what it is. That's a big deal. So to that end, I'm in favor of the I'm in favor of the zone text amendment as staff drafted it, because I feel like it makes sense, and as Commissioner Bass said, it's the first step of probably many, but I think we're going to have to adjust as we go forward, but I think this is a good fit for now.
And it is what council requested.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner Jones.
Thanks. So I actually I want to kind of explain some of my thinking about this here, because first of all, I use Airbnb pretty frequently, usually for leisure, not for business. The reasons why I would use Airbnb as opposed to why I would stay in a hotel are actually very different. And I think that's something really important to call out, but I'll speak to that in a moment. My thinking about Airbnb, at least as it started initially, and there has been an evolution certainly, is that, if someone owns something, whether it's a condo or a house, they should kind of be able to do whatever they want with it. But I've had to kind of really step back in that regard, because we have a less than 2% vacancy rate in Los Angeles County right now, which means that, housing needs in a place like West Hollywood are very different from where they would be in a place like Santa Fe, which I recently visited and used an Airbnb, or Joshua Tree, where I recently visited and used an Airbnb, or even in a place like Paris, which I visited and used Airbnb last summer. So I think that we need to be mindful. I think that there is certainly a balance, and I agree with Commissioner Bass that this is not the last that we are going to, kind of the last time we're going to consider this. I guess my thoughts in regard to the cap are, I actually think I would recommend more nights than 90, but no more than half the nights of the year. So approximately, 180, 182. And I say that because, if someone has a spare bedroom in their condo, and for me, there is a question of ownership here, but if someone has permission from their landlord to rent a spare bedroom in their room and the landlord's okay with it, then, by all means, that's their prerogative. But the fact of the matter is, you're getting more per night from an Airbnb than you would from a full-time renter, and that's just a fact. So I don't know that I would want to put no cap on it, but I think that 90 could be somewhat prohibitive, and it sounds like that there are people who truly do, benefit from this or who need it to live. So maybe we recommend increasing that amount. I would be okay with half the nights of the year. I I don't want to pull a number out of the ether, if you will. I'm kind of subject to flexibility on that. But again, I also want to emphasize that I don't think that the hotel versus Airbnb comparison is totally valid, at least not in this instance, for home sharing. Like, if I'm on a business trip, I'm staying at the Hyatt and getting room service at the end of a 14-hour day. I'm not going to stay in an Airbnb and hang out with somebody I've never met and go buy groceries. Like, I'm not doing it. So I'm just saying, I mean, there are very different needs, you know, for business travelers, at least for the kind of business travel that I do, as opposed to when I'm like, hey, I want to meet new people or I want to have this very local experience. So I think a hosted home Airbnb experience specifically, as it pertains to this ZTA, I am comfortable with moving forward with this. And I feel like as a city, we are evolving to kind of welcome these home sharing, which is, you know, their home sharing platforms, into our community. But I just want to draw that distinction between hotel versus Airbnb, because you buy groceries or you want to cook or you don't. They're very different, and I think conflating the two is dangerous, because the reasons I would stay at a hotel again and the reasons I would get an Airbnb are very different. So I'm okay with the ZTA as it is. A long-winded explanation, but I want to be transparent with the public about my thinking about this. But I do think that the 90-day cap is a little arbitrary, and I would recommend increasing it.
Okay. Well, I'm all over the place with this. I got to tell you, I came in thinking one thing, and after hearing some of the comments from public, I opened my mind a bit. I do think that the zone text amendment and having some regulation is a benefit for the city and for the people who are wanting to do the sharing. I'm also thinking 90 days after hearing what public their comments might be too little number of days. I also don't think it should be unlimited, because I think that there is a difference. What you're getting as an Airbnb or sharing for a few nights, you're making more per night than you would if you took in a roommate, and I think that does mean that you're maybe taking some of the beds off the market to help fill our need for some housing, particularly for students who might be attending university nearby and so forth. They might want to rent a room, or somebody who's just coming to the city and wanting to get a job and get their feet wet here and get to learn about it. So I'd like to move this forward, but I do think since we're just recommending to council, that we would recommend that they consider more than 90 days and less than 180.
Right. I have a suggestion for maybe how to word that, because the 90 days isn't in the zone text amendment, but it's part of the question as to whether you want this as a land use. Mm-hmm. And so maybe the way you could frame a recommendation is that you recommend the zone text amendment and you would still support it as a land use even if that number was higher. So they know that if they change that number, the planning commission would still be okay with it up to, you could put in a number, you don't have to put in a number, right. But I think I heard from a majority that you would be comfortable with it as a land use, right, with a higher number.
I would support that up to 180 days.
Right, I think that I'm hearing consensus that it shouldn't be unlimited, that we sort of, at this point, the outside be 180 days. That's my thought.
So you could maybe add...
Am I not reading that correctly?
No. I just made a motion. I pushed the button. You pushed the button. I pushed the button.
Okay.
If we're making a recommendation, what if we say, not to exceed,
Not to exceed 180 days.
Right, but I think it should be framed as you support the land.
180 is quite good.
What's that?
I said I think Stacy's suggestion of 180 is quite good.
Maybe we take a straw poll. Just blurt out a number and we'll see.
Well, I think
My point
there's
was
a
just
motion, and
Oh, there's a motion. There's a motion. Yeah.
Lynn, you made the motion, but you didn't articulate it out loud. So would you do that, and so we know what we're voting on?
I move that we approve the zone text amendment and recommend to council to consider possibly increasing the minimum days stays to up to 180 days, with a special note, perhaps, to focus on aging in place. We've all been focusing on affordable housing, but we haven't been focusing on aging in place. And if you think about a number of our speakers even, this is a way for them to keep their homes in West Hollywood. This is a way for them to age in place and stay here.
Okay, so with the recommendation, no more than 180 days. We're clear on that? Okay, take a vote.
And the motion passes with one Commissioner Carvello voting no. There is no appeal process. This is a recommendation to City Council.
Okay, thank you very much. We're moving on then to 10C. This is another zone text amendment, this one dealing with cannabis regulations.
Chair, may we have a 3-minute intermission?
3-minute intermission. 3.
If we say 3, it'll be 10.
It'll be
There's a line at the restroom.
Make it 5.
Oh, well, I'm sitting right next to you. And I'm from Jordan.
Are there police over there?
Yeah.
Yes, no, and I don't say that because you let me say that because I might forget, and then I'll be picking myself tomorrow.
I'll make sure to get back. Thank you so much.
I don't leave home without it.
Thank you so much.
implementation of it.
And it's been made disgusting with some of the attitudes over the course of all these years.
So it's certainly an interesting thought.
This is bringing it up to more discussion, which is a good thing.
Yeah, it is good. It's not going away. That was, they made a different presentation.
I don't care when I need direct emails.
Right. Okay, we have all of our commission. Well, where is our one commissioner? Lynn? Where's Lynn? She's in the back? Okay. Well, we're going to, we took more than our 5 minutes or 3 minutes that I said. It's almost 8 minutes now. So we're going to move on to the 10C, zone text amendment that deals with cannabis regulations. And I thank you. We're going to have our, thank you, our staff report.
Thank you, Chair John Kehoe, Assistant Director in Community Development. So tonight we're bringing forward draft regulations for the legalization of adult use cannabis. I'm sure all of you are aware that the citizens of California have legalized it, and the legalization will go into effect in January. In order for us to have local regulations in place by January, we need to develop ordinance regulations and have them get to the City Council in November, so they'll be implemented by January. So that is the timeline that we're on right now. First, I wanted to let everyone know that in order to develop these regulations here at City Hall, we created a cannabis team of staff members from throughout City Hall. We have staff members from planning, building, code compliance, economic development, finance, legal services, legislative services, and the city attorney's office. We wanted to make sure folks were involved from all different aspects of City Hall. That way we'd get points of views from all different areas of regulation and interest in City Hall. We've hired a contract planner, Jerry Hittleman, and he's here to give the presentation tonight. He's been very actively involved in researching cannabis in various locations in California and Colorado and various other locations, and putting together the package here tonight. We have gone to the City Council already on several occasions to get initial direction as we have been developing our regulations. The direction we received from Council was to create a set of regulations that would create a high standard for cannabis use, while at the same time making sure that the regulations would not unduly hamper the cannabis industry. So the idea was that we want to be a pro-cannabis community and have a high standard so that the cannabis businesses can be good business neighbors in our community. With this in mind, our team has developed a two-pronged approach. We're proposing to modify the zoning ordinance regulation so that way it creates a way to allow as a land use cannabis businesses, and then to create a business license for the various cannabis types of business actions as a business license. So that way we can put regulations on the actual business operator, because we believe that it's really important that the primary regulation be on the business operator, and it's more of a business issue than a land use issue. So we've already taken the business license regulations to the Business License Commission. That happened on Tuesday night, and Jerry can speak a little bit more to that. And we're here tonight with the zoning regulations. So I just wanted to give you an overview on where we are, and after the recommendation from tonight from the Planning Commission, we'll then put that together with the business license recommendation and be taking the combined one to the City Council. I believe it's scheduled for the first meeting in November is when we're anticipating going to the City Council with the combined regulations and the combined package for the City Council to take action on. So with that, Jerry is here and can start going over the proposals.
Thank you, John, Honorable Chair and Commissioners. What we're asking you to do tonight is to make recommendations to the City Council on changes to basically Chapter 19 zoning ordinance on commercial land use and permit requirements for cannabis, a number of parking spaces for these businesses, various definitions that will be added to the regulations, and also adding cannabis uses as allowed use. Now, keeping in mind, we do have medical marijuana collectives as a use right now since about probably the late 1990s. So just to bring you updated on state law, in November of 2016, the voters approved Proposition 64, which legalizes adult use of cannabis as opposed to the medical use for people 21 years of age or older, allows them to smoke, ingest, possess, and so forth, cannabis, and also everybody, each resident is allowed to have up to 6 cannabis plants in their residence. In June of this year, the state legislature came up with and approved SB 94, which pretty much combines the adult use and medical use regulations into one set of regulations, and requires cannabis businesses to obtain state licenses for the manufacture, distribution, cultivation, and other uses related to cannabis. There's also a trailer bill in number AB 133, which allows medical and adult uses to be located in the same premises now. So as John mentioned, we did go to the City Council 3 times in May for direction. July 10th, you might have, some of you might have been there. We had a cannabis study session with experts from California, Colorado. And then August 21st, we received more detailed direction where the City Council said to go ahead and allow and come up with regulations for medical use dispensaries, adult use retail, consumption areas, delivery services, indoor cultivation but just as an ancillary use, not a standalone use. So that can be up to 25% of the floor area, for instance, of a business. Same thing for manufacturing, no standalone, but again, ancillary. And then we're allowing cannabis testing laboratories for use, which is just more of a support service for these cannabis uses. So they also directed us to limit the number of cannabis businesses, as you'll see later on and in the staff report, to a certain amount of business licenses, and the businesses will be chosen on a merit-based system. We also had a number of other meetings this past summer. We had 3 stakeholder business meetings, received some great input, met with the hotel managers. Some of them are interested in cannabis uses in the hotels. LA County Sheriff and Fire, they're doing their own regulations. Public Safety Commission, and then the Chamber of Commerce as well. The zone text amendment is for allowable cannabis uses to be added to the zoning regulations, and that would be adult use, consumption areas, and medical use in all commercial zone districts, so along all our major corridors, commercial corridors. Cannabis uses to be prohibited are standalone manufacturing, cultivation, and distribution. The main reason for that is there's really no zoning for these type of uses, which typically go into industrial zones. So you might see that occur in some other cities. I think the city of Linwood is embracing that, having large standalone facilities to do this. Cannabis uses for future consideration, want to see how the state regulates these uses. We're going to monitor this. This is micro businesses, temporary use permits for special events, and also mobile consumption lounges. The parking regulations for all cannabis uses, we're proposing 3.5 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet of floor area, which is consistent with other retail and with the existing medical use right now. We do have certain requirements that are going into the zoning ordinance, and this is consistent with state law. The first one, that they shall not be located within 600-foot radius of a daycare facility, youth center, or school, and that's for all the uses. There will be 8 adult retail uses, 8 consumption areas for edibles only, and then 8 for smoking, vaping, and edibles or ingestion. And then we are proposing 8 medical dispensaries, and that would include the 4 that are existing. And then consumption areas would be restricted to persons 21 and older, and that's, you can see that could occur for adult consumption areas and for medical dispensaries. Medical use dispensaries also can cater to people 18 and over, so that's a little distinction there. Consumption areas may be co-located with these uses, with an adult use retail and a medical use dispensary, and that would be limited to 25% of the area. And then we want to make sure that their consumption areas shall comply with the city's existing smoking regulations, as you can see. And then consumption areas shall be no sales or ingestion of tobacco or alcohol products. And that's consistent with state law. The definitions will be added to, of these various uses, will be added to, again, section 19.90.020. And just for your information, how the Planning Commission fits into this, or the Community Development Department, this is the process for approving cannabis licenses. After the ordinance is adopted by the City Council, the cannabis license applications will be submitted within a 30-day period. The top 8 applicants in each category will be determined within 45 days. And then after that, the various uses will have to get a zone clearance. So that's an administrative process. We didn't put a time frame on that because if we get 32 plus or minus businesses coming in, we're not sure how long that will take. but typically it would take 45 to 60 days. And then the City Business License Commission will have to issue those licenses for all 32 potential licenses. Then the top applicants, again, would have to obtain a state license to keep that valid at all times. The Business License Commission heard this item on Tuesday night, and they recommended overall approval to the City Council with some minor changes to the provisions. And then the next steps would be Planning Commission comments and recommendations will be forwarded to the City Council. City Council adoption, we're anticipating going November 6th. City regulations will be sent to the California Bureau of Cannabis Control, a new agency up at the state, and then business license applications will be accepted. These are discussion points we'd like you to stay focused on tonight because there are the zoning text amendments and we do have the municipal code amendments that the Business License Commission heard. It's under their purview, and then the City Council. So cannabis uses to be added, cannabis uses, what permitted zones they can be in within that commercial category, parking regulations, requirements. Again, it's a minimum distance of 600 feet per state law, and then the maximum number of cannabis uses allowed. As you can see, we already talked about adult use consumption areas and medical use dispensaries. There's also 8 licenses for delivery services, and those are for the ones that are located in West Hollywood, that have an actual office or their business address is in West Hollywood. And there will also be a license required for delivery services delivering to West Hollywood, let's say from Los Angeles. They'd have to get a license as well. And then, of course, the cannabis use definitions. At this point, we're all here and ready for questions.
Oh, I have a
Excuse me. You want to speak? Thank you, Commissioner.
Yeah, I do.
Vice Chair Jones.
Although I am really enjoying this picture of these little cakes.
We could all use one at this point.
I'll try to make this brief on that note. Can you jog back just like 2 or 3 slides really quickly? I just want to be clear on one point that you brought up in terms of Planning Commission purview. Keep going. This slide here. So to be clear, so it says Planning Commission purview, but it says top applicants apply for zone clearance from city. I'm not speaking into the mic, sorry. Can you just reiterate what Planning Commission purview is in terms of this process? Because you said it's administrative.
Just to approve this process
just to
tonight.
Approve the process.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
But then it is pretty much over the counter at the Community Development Department.
Okay, great. And in RE2 delivery services, these only apply to services in West Hollywood, and I may be getting ahead of myself here, but does this mean that services that exist outside of West Hollywood cannot deliver to locations inside West Hollywood unless they are licensed to operate in the city?
That's correct. We'd also be looking to see that they are in conformance with the regulations, let's say in Los Angeles or another city that they're delivering from.
Got
so
it.
Both.
Okay.
Both.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Question? Yes, Commissioner Altschul.
What about adopting a kind of a reciprocity?
Can you speak into your mic?
Like some of the professional organizations have, the Bar Association and so forth, that if licensed in Beverly Hills or Culver City or Santa Monica, they can then therefore do business here if Santa Monica, Culver City, and Beverly Hills recognizes our licenses to deliver there.
That's a potential. We would definitely let them deliver here, and hopefully that would occur in other cities as well.
But that's not before us today.
No.
No.
Why not? If we're talking about 8 delivery services and talking about the delivery services from outside of the city, they have to be licensed here. Rather than have them licensed, if they're licensed where they are and they recognize our licenses, just that's all you need.
That's something that's not written into the code now, but perhaps you can make that recommendation to the City Council.
Lauren, you understand what I'm talking about, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've been talking about that internally too, is what level of license or requirements to require for the delivery businesses operating from another city. So we're talking about that internally, and it's in the business license ordinance, but it'll be part of what the council considers if they want to do some sort of reciprocity and not have it be a full hearing for every operator that operates outside the city.
Right, but that's not necessarily what our commission tonight needs to deal with.
Correct. But it's something the council will talk about when they hear the whole ordinance.
Okay. So our focus right now is just on these land uses. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
address those issues. Yes, Commissioner.
Related to that, I'd like to get us some clarity around these 8 times 8 times 8 times 8. When I spoke with staff earlier today, they said, yes, we could combine licenses. But the language I'm reading here is that we are being asked to approve a maximum of 32 cannabis use businesses, which to me implies locations. So I want to get some real clarity, because these are the decisions we're being asked to talk about in terms of zoning. We're talking about locations. Business licensing is talking about the licensing and all of the different things you can do at any one particular location. Mm-hmm. So when I looked at this, my first question, and I asked my assistant to research it for me, I said, go to Aurora, Colorado, and what do they license? And they allow, for a city of 300,000 people, 24 licenses. And they are broken into wards, and each ward is allowed a maximum of 4 licenses. And those wards are 60,000 people. So I compare that 4 licenses for 60,000 people to 32 licenses for 45,000 people, and I gulp. The next request I asked of my assistant is to find out how many liquor stores there were in West Hollywood, comparing this plus or minus to a similar concept. Yes, we have grocery stores that sell liquor. Yes, we have bars, but this is really kind of a liquor store thing. In West Hollywood, we have 11 liquor stores and 3 fine wine shops. So I'm trying to wrap my head around the number 32, and I kind of, my assistant did a little map for me, because I do visual, and I take this map and I start putting 32 more dots on here, and I have a lot of concerns. Related to that, I have concerns about the effect of 32 physical locations on our neighborhood serving businesses. These locations are going to make a lot of money. There is not one of our neighborhood serving businesses that could possibly compete on a rental basis with these 32 businesses. And I look at that and I say, how many nail salons are going to go out of business? How many shoe repair places, cafes are we going to lose as a city in exchange for, we're going to lose 32, exactly. So these are the questions I was asking of staff to, get some clarity around how places that have already done this are doing the math, not just every 600 feet, but what's realistic for this size community? Those are my questions.
So West Hollywood is not Aurora, Colorado. That's number one. So that's a totally different city, totally different demographics, different social environment. So we can certainly identify the fact that we're different. We're an adult community. We're not a community that has a significant small child population. We're not a suburban community with lots of single-family homes. We're a high-density adult community. So we already know that. So that's kind of where we started from. We also started from the place that our city council was giving us direction that they wanted us to be a little bit more proactive about cannabis facilities. They talked about cannabis being possibly being a tourist issue, economic development issue. So those were things that the city council talked about. Also, when we talk about the 8 cannabis licenses in each criteria, one business, one location could have adult use retail, consumption area, smoking, consumption area edible, and they could also be a medical use. So that, and they could also be a delivery. So all of those licenses could be captured by one location. So worst case scenario, yes, that's 32 locations. We don't believe that a business is going to let go and not want to try to collect as many of those business licenses as possible. The other thing we all do have to remember is this is illegal under federal law, right? So it's still an issue with federal law. So there might be some property owners, maybe many property owners, who don't want to put their properties at risk of having the federal government come in and do something to them if the federal government decides to come down on retail cannabis as opposed to medical cannabis. So that's also going to do some limitation as to which property owners want to go into this business. So that's kind of the overall view of this. And then Jerry can talk a little bit more about the analysis we did on coming up with an 8 in each category, but we did do some calculations. We presented some numbers to City Council, and so that's kind of how we got to this particular circumstance.
But to be clear, on page 10, we're being asked to, the proposed zone text amendment would allow a maximum of 32 cannabis use businesses.
That's correct.
And I want to be clear that we're not business license, we're about the zoning. And
that's absolutely right. It's possible that it could be that. What we're saying is we don't think that's going to be the reality because we know there are going to be businesses that want to obtain a license in multiple categories. And so if they get the license and all of that, then they would collect several, and so there would be fewer than 32 because some locations would have multiple licenses.
But is it not possible for us to say, yeah, that's licensing, that's nice, you can have 32 licenses, but we as zoning say maximum of 8 locations or 12 locations?
Sure, the Planning Commission can certainly decide that they would like to recommend a different number. That's certainly within your purview.
Thank you.
David, anybody else? Public comment, that's true. So if we have no more questions of staff, we're going to move on to public comment and open it up to the public. The first speaker would be Manny Rodriguez, who would be followed by Danny Shaker.
Twice in one meeting. Hello, commissioners. Well, thanks to the culture of propositions here in California, this train has left the station. Here we go. I have not much to say about it except for section 19.36.092, which prohibits the smoking and vaping of cannabis within 600 feet of a daycare facility, a youth center, or school. I'd suggest you also consider adding to that list a 600-foot distance from residential. We recently saw an attempt to, of all things, activate a residential alley, an alley that abuts a residential neighborhood. And by the way, our commercial zone is 3 miles long, and most of it abuts residential neighborhoods. So during the over-the-counter or administrative permit process, I think the planning department should consider and not be oblivious to the effects that residential neighborhoods may incur from any kind of alley activation, outdoor patio, accordion doors, or any other open portal that may create noise, light, or odor trespass onto a residential neighborhood. I mean, Fresh Corn Grill can't keep the stink out of the neighborhood, so I don't know how, we have to be very careful that we insulate these consumption lounges. So I encourage you to consider those issues in your recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Dan Shaker?
Good evening, Chairwoman, Commissioners, staff. My name is Danny Shaker. I'm a City of West Hollywood property owner. My partner and I are the co-founders of Think and Grow Lab. It's a nonprofit, excuse me, located at the La Cretz Innovation Center. That's the City of Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator. Our mission is to help facilitate the City of LA's social equity program by putting on monthly forums which We've created a mock application for the City of LA, and we help applicants go through it, line them up with vendors such as security plans, site plans, contractors, even marketing and branding, and even investors. We're also developing a facility in Long Beach, which will be a sustainable, clean tech, vertically integrated incubator, which will truly give applicants a hands-on learning experience in cultivation, extracting, and manufacturing of infused goods. We're also looking forward to submitting an application in the City of West Hollywood for adult use retail with on-site consumption that will provide industry training to social equity entrepreneurs and promote consumer education. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers, or was just these two? Thank you. Let's open it up now for our discussion.
Can we have the 5 points that we should be focusing on back up on the screen, please? Thank you.
Who wants to go?
I have some questions. When you presented this to the council in August, the proposal had the 4 existing medical, 6 retail, which would automatically include consumption, and 4 additional consumption, which gives us 10 consumption locations, but a total of 14 possible locations. I watched the city council meeting last night, which is probably why you got emails from me after 11 o'clock at night, because I was finishing, I live an exciting life. So I watched it last night to kind of get an idea of what their direction was, and they did say they wanted more than 14, but from 14 to 32 is a pretty big jump for me. I also liked the idea that the retail locations would just have the option of consumption without having to get a separate license. And it's not within our, we have to talk about it to be able to get to these items, and that is, if we're doing a merit-based system, I could see one way to reduce from 32 as being some credit given to people who are going to coexist these locations when you're doing that merit-based system. So you might not have, one person who's the best at delivery and one person who's best at retail get the highest scores, but the second place would have been the delivery person for the same retail location. So now they were coexisting because they're getting credit for that coexistence. So if we go with this approach, we can't, it's not within our purview, I suppose, to make that recommendation, but I would ask you to consider that as part of the merit process. But I like the idea of just letting retail and medical have the consumption option, and that puts them together, but increasing the number. I don't think we need to go to 32 locations, maybe 16, maybe 18 instead of the 14. But we do need these additional locations that are not just retail. And the council made a good point that there might be some hotels or some places that might want to do this. So I don't know where, kind of like where I was on not knowing 90 days or 180 days or whatever on Airbnb. 32 doesn't feel right, but 14 clearly wasn't right either. And I don't know where that number is, but it scares me to think we could put 32 potentially. I agree, probably not going to happen, but we have to look at the possibility.
Right.
Otherwise, I like this. I like living in a city that is so incredibly progressive on something like this, and the direction in all of the council meetings has not been how do we protect ourselves from this, but rather how do we do it right to make sure that our businesses are taken care of and our residents and our tourists are taken care of. And I'll tell you, living in my neighborhood, there's a pot shop at the end of the block on one side of the street, and there's a bar on the other side. I wish they were both pot shops because of the impact at night. I much prefer somebody high sitting in their car hotboxing in front of my place rather than the drunks walking by at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and leaving a bottle in the bushes in front of my place and waking my dogs up. So I'm very much in favor of this proposal, but I'm with you, Lynn. I'm thinking 32 is a little high.
Is it possible to allow for the 32 licenses, but to limit the number of locations they go to let's just say fewer? So i.e.
That was my question.
Yeah, so 32 licenses.
Divided by 2.
Only allowed in maybe 24 locations or 20 locations.
Well, if you divide
Well,
32...
I'm just asking, not saying that we're actually going this route, but that was just a question.
I think that the comment... Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, it's a potential to recommend that. Yeah, because we anticipate that happening, but we just can't predict how many will co-locate.
So if we wanted to say, let's take the 32 possible combinations and make it half that, so 16 locations, physical locations, mix and match your licenses, whatever blows your hair back.
That's a possibility.
Okay.
I'm concerned about 32 locations, and the comment, I think that they came up that means 32 of our other businesses are going to go out, because everybody knows that these cannabis establishments are going to be making a lot of money, and that the landlords who are going to be renting to them are going to be able to ask for high rent because they're going to be able to afford to pay it. We already know that because we know how the communities that have allowed even medical marijuana have been profiting. It's a big business now, and it's going to get bigger as we go forward. So I'm concerned about that location-wise.
So,
Stacy, you want to make a comment?
Sure. So I have a quick question, just to be clear, because maybe I'm reading this wrong. I'm actually not worried about there being 32 marijuana locations, cannabis locations in the city of West Hollywood. So to make sure I understand the implications of the bill that Governor Brown signed, so this essentially just allows for sale and or use of adult use and medical use on the same site, but we would require, and state law would require, separate licenses for those purposes, correct? So all told, you could have one location that's doing adult use, medical use, I'm assuming very possibly delivery, with maybe even some consumption areas. So theoretically, one location, as you said, could have, up to 4, maybe 5 uses?
That's correct.
Yes. Would it be a maximum of 4 uses? Like the smoking, vaping, and edibles, and then edibles only, I'm assuming it would be 4 of the 5.
It's that's potentially correct. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I can be swayed, but I'm not. I was on business license when we had a hearing about Zen healing. I think it was the most people that ever packed into a room for business license at that time. This is big business, and people who are in cannabis regulation and sales are very savvy, and it's a huge growth potential industry, and I don't have great concerns about there ever being 32 separate locations as per this. I mean, it's 32 licenses, but I'm not uncomfortable with limiting it below 32, but I don't know that we need to go even down to half that, because I think that actually it will be many less locations than we anticipate. I don't have any like grave concerns about that.
And that too, the people that are already in the business already have, they're more likely to be the ones who are going to get the licenses because they've already have a track record.
Right, so we have one existing business that gets 3 more licenses.
Right.
That right there is, 28 licenses left. I mean, I'm just not, that's for one place.
Right.
I'm just not that.
I'm agreeing with you.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I just am not that
I want to
concerned
ask,
about it.
but to be clear, I'd like to...
I think there's going to be 4, or whatever.
I'd like legal to clarify something for me, though, on that note, and I don't disagree with you conceptually, but we're voting on the number of businesses, the number of locations.
Right.
Business license could change something, and we've already approved X number of locations, then some other ordinance could change the number of business licenses, and those locations are, if they're approved by us, they're on the books, and then they will be made.
But are we conflating? Business, to me, is not synonymous with location.
Right.
You could have a business a
about
location
zoning.
that has multiple businesses, correct?
Yes.
Unless I'm seeing it otherwise defined in the staff report, there are 32 licenses allowed for total per year as per this ordinance.
No, but on page 10, it's at 32 for the, in business, a business license, they're talking about 32 licenses, but then they're also talking about 32 businesses in the zone text amendment for us. So that's a business location, and that was what my earlier question was about.
Right, but there wouldn't be 32 unless they were given the licenses, 32 separate licenses.
32 business licenses maximum.
Correct.
For any of these specified uses, correct?
Correct.
So it's not a location.
There could be 30.
Right,
Yes, we've talked
theoretically
about it. There could be
speaking.
32 locations.
But they're not
There could be
separate. There's not like, oh,
If we approve
business
it.
license can do 32 licenses, but one place could have, and it is a license, walk with me down this road quickly. There is, you could not be a business, you would have to be a business with a license for a use in every location that you have. So say you're a chain and you have a license to do 4 of the 5 here in one location. You would have to have separate licenses, even with the same business name, if you were at a separate location, correct?
That is correct. And,
Okay.
and another piece of the business license ordinance, which isn't in here, is that one applicant cannot get more than, you're not going to have one applicant who's going to have 2 adult use retail licenses, because we don't want one company coming in and taking
up all
8.
of the licenses.
We want to keep
right.
it open. So one, we're using all these different terms, but one company can't have multiple
Right.
of the same category.
Multiple locations and you. and-
I just want to make sure we understand the difference between, it's 32 licenses total per
Yes.
year.
Yes. Can I just say 2 other things about the state law that came up? One is that under the state law, delivery does not have to operate out of a retail store. It doesn't have to have a glass front where people come in. It could operate out of an office space. So if you're thinking about locations, it could be in an office building somewhere. They're not all going to be retail locations. And then I think the point about the governor recently signing, I think it was AB 133, is important, because the way that the original bill was drafted, medical and adult couldn't be co-located on the same premises, and there was such a concern about that, there was such a desire to have them on the same location, that they adopted a bill to change that rule. And so I think that's important, just to understand what these operators are likely going to want to do.
But to be clear, the delivery isn't part of the 32.
Correct. It's still a location, but if you're thinking of your street frontages, they may not be operating out of street
Of
frontages.
course.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about the math on the 32 that you've given us, that's, delivery's not even in that math.
Yes, it is.
It's the first 8. It's the first 8. The first 8.
The first 4, 8 are,
delivery.
are,
It's right.
are the 32. That last one isn't part of the 32.
Yeah, you're right.
That's
40.
correct. That is correct.
Also, I just wanted to remind, we kind of glossed over the process, but before you can get the zone clearance, which would be a physical location, they will have already gone to business license to get vetted and to be given what we're calling the green ticket, saying that you can now move forward. And so that's where they might have already been given the ticket that already gives them 3 licenses. And so when they come to planning, that would be 1. And so you would never get to 8. Because the licenses would already have been given out to one operator.
Commissioner Altshull would like to have an opportunity to speak.
We should pay some attention and discuss Manny's suggestion about distance from residents. And I think we need to protect our residents in this regard. It's not a requirement, as I read this, that they be at least 600 feet minimum from residences, but I think there should be a number that we should toss around and discuss as to whether or not they be distanced a certain number of feet from the residences, and what should that number of feet be. Because I think the people that live directly across the alley, or even if there is no alley, abutting the business corridors, are subjected to one of these things. It's going to be very uncomfortable and very impactful to them.
The only concern I have is we're such a small city that, almost everything is abutting a residential area, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's why we have to consider it, and that's why when the medical marijuana uses were parceled out, the locations were specifically parametered in groups where the residents would be the least affected or not affected at all.
I'd like to bring up something related, because I'm in agreement with Manny. In conceptually, not about the 600 feet, but about the impacts on our residents. And one of my points in my questions here is, and I didn't see it in the language here, is about the odor egress for one, and those impacts, and how those are going to be very specifically curtailed with double door situations, air curtains, HVAC systems, ventilation, because it's that egress of the odor, and you have to look at it not just as the front retail door, but that back door onto the alley, having that same ventilation, the air curtain, you know what an air curtain is, right? It's essentially a downdraft that keeps a separation of the two spaces. Okay, so keeping the smoke in and the fresh air out, if you will. So that would be something that I would like to see addressed related to what John's talking about.
And I would suggest perhaps 300 feet from residences and no outdoor consumption.
But 300 feet even is huge. That's a lot.
We can find it.
So I raised these issues with staff, and they tell me that all of the smoking, which is really where the impact's going to be. I don't care if somebody's eating a gummy bear across the alley from me, but so it's smoking. They tell me it's going to have to follow all of the smoking regulations in our city, which are already pretty strong. So I'm comfortable with that. The one area that I think that we could make a really big impact here is when they took this to city council. Staff recommended that these uses not be allowed in the CN1 zones, which are most directly impacting residents. And council felt like I remember John Duran in the video last night said, you know, I see a cute little retail space next to this, but there were some real serious questions by council about consumption areas, specifically smoking in the CN1 zone, and asked for more detail there. I believe we should recommend consumption areas not be allowed in CN1. It's very, very limited in our city where that's located, and I think that we could, if they want to have retail or delivery there, that's fine, but maybe not consumption. And I just want to, since I have the mic for a moment, I don't think we need to differentiate between the smoking, vaping, edibles consumption area and the edibles only area, because if you get a consumption, smoking, vaping, edibles, you don't have to allow smoking. You can, but you don't have to. So if we just, because I don't know, I just think that we should have one type of consumption area and they decide how to do it. But I changed the subject, but came to me, so I said it.
What's the rationale behind that? Was there a state law precedent for that differentiation, or was that a differentiation that staff made?
It's something that staff came up with because we thought that people might just want to do edibles and not have to deal with people smoking. A lot of people don't like smoking these days, so that's why we had that distinction.
So back to the ventilation and filtration and doors, some sort of...
But that's not within our purview to limit that at this point, right?
Well, that's my question. In as much as we're approving locations, are we putting conditions on those locations?
We can.
And I just have visions of families with their baby buggies driving, walking down the sidewalk and the door opening and a cloud of hallucinogenic smoke hitting Junior, I mean.
Understand, we're not permitting anything. We're not permitting anything or conditioning anything. We're only making recommendations.
Right.
So in the business license, operating requirements, so one of the conditions is an odor-absorbing ventilation and exhaust system shall be installed so that odor generated inside the business is not detected outside the property or lease area boundaries or anywhere on adjacent property or public rights-of-way or anywhere within any other unit located within the same building as the cannabis use. So that clearly addresses the indoor activities, and so it doesn't say what they need to do. It doesn't dictate a specific way of handling it. It just says that the result has to be that you don't have the impact.
There's no
those
egress of the
impacts.
smoke.
Right.
Okay, as long as that's addressed.
Yeah.
No free samples.
Yeah, and we did get that example from Colorado where they've had a lot of complaints, so we took the exact language from them.
Cool. Got to learn from where they're already doing it, right?
Yeah.
And I would think we could use that exact same language in our recommendation with respect to distance and other common sense protections for the residents.
So if there are those restrictions that they have to make sure that there's no odor and impacts escaping from their premises, then why have 300 feet or 600 feet? Because it's already taken care of by that regulation. Right? Lauren?
Well, the noise isn't.
That's
correct.
And the other, thing to remember is we're placing this as a business license requirement rather than a land use permit. So that means the business license comes up for renewal every year. And so every year we can then evaluate how they've behaved, how they've been managing, if there have been any impacts. And then with the renewal, we can add conditions to minimize or impact it. So
or deny a
or
renewal.
deny it, right. So unlike a CUP where we can't do that on an annual basis, through the business license we can. And so at a year, if we had told them to install a ventilation system and we've been working with them because of code compliance and they haven't figured it out, then at the renewal, it's possible we could then say, no, you're not going to get a renewal. And so then that business would have to close.
Or that particular use would no longer be able to be...
The license would be revoked.
Yeah, that they might be able to have other licenses, though. They might be able to do other things, right?
It would depend on what the one that was the violation.
What the violation was about.
I'm in support of the ZTA, of this recommendation as long as the same protections for, tobacco smoke for residents are in place for this, I'm comfortable moving forward with this as is.
Yeah.
If that's a motion, I'll second it.
I already have a motion on the floor.
What was your motion?
Oh, I pushed the button.
What was it?
Well, my motion is that we go slow. You can, as Mr. Altschul is wont to say, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. We can always add more to it, but going backwards will be very difficult.
Well, what would that look like going
And what
slow?
that would look like is a maximum of 12 physical locations, regardless of license type, excluding the delivery. Delivery is a separate item. That's 4 times more than we currently have.
3 times more.
3, we have 4.
Excuse me?
I think we have 4 medical dispensaries.
Right,
allegedly.
and so if we...
I think there's probably more, but...
It's 3 times, so if we go to 4, if we go to 12, then...
Okay, that's your motion.
My motion is that we approve the language as it is, with the exception of the physical locations be limited to 12, excluding delivery service.
Okay, is there a second? No one on the commission wants to say.
I would agree with that if there was a distance included from residences suggested, say, 300 feet.
Are you seconding it with an amendment?
That were added.
With an amendment that the
That were
physical
added to the
location be no closer than 300 feet from
any
a residential location.
Yeah.
Geographically,
I don't think that's going to work, John.
It is.
I don't want to limit it at this point. I'd rather start with what we have, with all due respect, and, you know, I don't want to over-regulate this right now. I don't want to stifle opportunities for innovation. People are going to get creative, and, you know, if we need to regulate further down the road, I think that we should do that, but I don't want to over-regulate the problem that's not a problem yet.
My recollection when we had that study session, that the council really wanted our city to be to promote cannabis use, basically, and the HEP, and they were looking at that as something that would draw people to our city, being an adult community and so forth. So I think the intention of even having any of these regulations would be to be able to regulate, but also do it in a very liberal manner. That's what I thought I heard them say. So I think that that's what staff has created here, and I would be inclined to support the zone text amendment as presented here. That's my thought.
I agree. I'm with that. I'm not worried about existing businesses when we have so many retail spaces vacant right now that I agree with what staff is saying. I don't think we'll end up with 32, but I can't get on this arbitrary number thing like the last zone text amendment thing. I would go with how it's written.
So, but right now we have a motion on the floor and a second.
I withdraw my motion.
Okay, the motion's withdrawn. Okay, so I'll move it. You want to move it?
Yeah, I'll move to support the ZTA and recommendation to council as is.
Okay.
It's not letting me do it.
What's happening here?
We're in technical difficulties.
Technical difficulties. Where's our? There we go. Oh.
Okay, motion passes. We have 5 ayes, 2 noes, noting Commissioner Elchel and Hoopengarner voting no. There's no this is a recommendation to City Council. There is no appeal process.
So going on to item 11, new business, there is none. Unfinished business, there is none. Excluded consent, there is none. Items from staff, planning, managers update.
And nothing tonight.
Nothing tonight, thank you. Public comment at this time?
No public comment.
No general comments at this time. Items from commissioners?
Very, very quickly, I like the chair's suggestion that the parking regulations, the standard text we use in our conditions, be visited by staff, and I would like them to do that so we can have a consistency.
So you would like to ask staff to look at that?
Yeah, based on our conversation earlier today, I'd like them to come back with some idea of what that should look like. Informally is fine.
Okay.
I have a comment too.
Yes, comment.
I do. Sorry, I don't want it to go on, drag on. But in light of the one of the presentations we saw at our last meeting, I'm wondering what consensus would be, or if I can build consensus among my fellow commissioners, to require that the person who is legally responsible for the plans that come before us be present at and available for questions during the presentations made.
You mean the owner or the architect or both?
I mean the person who actually is legally responsible for, like the person taking legal responsibility by stamping and signing the plans. I would really like to have that person, I'd love to require it be that person has to give the presentation, but at minimum I would like them to be available at the meeting during the presentation for questions from the public and questions from commission. in light of some of the presentations that have come before us, I think that it will prevent mistakes and maybe some things moving forward that we don't, in a way that we don't want them to. Is that something that we could?
The plans that we see are not the working plans.
I'm aware of that. I'm aware of that.
So
but
I don't know they get stamped.
Well,
they don't get
I know
stamped.
they don't get stamped, but what I'm saying is the person who is responsible for the project ultimately, like there has to be someone who is actually legally. One of the people at one of the presentations we saw at our last meeting, that person is neither a licensed architect nor a structural engineer. He's not a licensed design professional. And I know that that person works with an architect, but that person was not at the presentation. And what I'd like to ask.
The supervisor person who's a responsible person.
That's right. Yeah. I would like that person to be, is that something that we can, first of all, I'd like to know if that's something that you all would be in agreement with. And I just think it complies with law, and it, I think, puts us in a better way to be able to make decisions and get questions answered. But legally, is that something that we could request?
I'll defer to the city attorney on the legal question about that. But the official applicant is who is listed on the application form, and they are the ones legally responsible for the application. When there is an owner, they actually sign an owner's affidavit that gives that applicant, whoever it may be, whether it's an applicant, a lawyer, just someone that they've hired, it can be anybody, that they have the official legal responsibility for that application. I'll defer to Lauren if she has any other thoughts on that, but.
I'll also jump in a little bit.
Okay.
So the architect of record, I think, is probably what you're talking about. So they are required to sign the building construction plans.
Right.
So they're not required by state law to sign plans that are reviewed by the Planning Commission.
Right.
So that's where it would be a little awkward to require them, because what happens sometimes a developer may hire a designer who might be an architect but not a registered architect.
Right.
To design a plan and have it go through the Planning Commission. And then they hire a registered architect to
do the rest of the plan.
To do the rest of it. Right. And so the question is, do we as a city want to limit the development and design of plans to registered architects versus this other group of people who might have architectural training but aren't registered for whatever reason? And so there's pros and cons to that, but it just means that you're limiting the pool of people who could come up with designs. So
well, not that could come up with designs, but that would actually be able to answer questions about the designs.
Right.
I guess that's my point, is that I want someone who's a licensed professional to be able to speak to the designs that are being submitted. That's all.
And I guess what I was saying is the developer may not have the licensed architect at the time the plans are submitted to us, to planning, because they've hired, designer. But I think they have to have some. We'll go back and take a look at it, and we'll give you a better answer at another meeting.
That's fair. I don't want to put you on the spot. I just, do we want people who aren't licensed submitting plans in West Hollywood? That would be my bigger question.
I would tend to agree with you, because if we're looking at plans that aren't done by a licensed architect, and we're being expected to make sure that they comply with all of our zoning, but then per our problem from 2 weeks ago, or a month ago, I've lost track, we were faced with a situation where something was going to have to be fundamentally changed in order to comply with building and safety, and therefore we were being asked to vote on something that was going to change in a way that was going to could potentially change our vote. Okay, and so to that extent, I would agree with Stacy that having someone who can make sure that all happens up front, in addition to all the pretty stuff.
I want to point out, though, and I just want to make a point, even a licensed architect, when they submit those design plans, they're not always going to be developed enough for building and safety to catch all of those things. There are going to be times when things come before the commission that are going to be revised when they get into construction documents. And it's sort of what I pointed out earlier. It's up to us then at that point to say, hey, this is minor, it's okay, or no, it's not, the Planning Commission didn't approve it in this way, and then we have to bring it back to you. But I just want to be clear, there are always going to be situations that we're not going to catch because they're just not developed enough at the planning process or the planning entitlement side of it. Those happen later in the process.
However, when those things happen and they have to change it sufficiently that it's not the plan that we approved, then it's going to have to come back.
That's exactly right, and we have done that on occasion.
Risk that the developer or the architect.
Yes.
It's their risk.
That's right.
That they're not going to get the approval, and they're going to have to go through the process again.
Right.
Correct.
It's not in any way an attack on staff. It's really not. I just, it's just food for thought. And really, it's in the interest of making the best decision for the community. That's the reason I serviced it.
Well as expediting the process.
Yeah. So for everybody involved. So that's just, we don't have to decide on it right now. I just wanted to bring that up.
Thank you for reminding us. And will staff think about that and give us some feedback somewhere down the road? The next item is adjournment. So with that, unless there's any other commissioners, Planning Commission will adjourn to our next regularly scheduled meeting on Thursday, October 19th, 2017, here at 6:30 in these chambers. Thank you, everybody.